Our story begins with men in suits in the alley, beating someone. Our protagonist is badly injured but still has cigarettes in his mouth. Park Kang-tae told the men that it hurt so much, but one of the men just told him that he'll give him some time to smoke his last cigarette. So, he grabbed his lighter to light up his cigarette while thanking the man very much. The lighter released a fire and he started smoking his cigar. The man told the bald man to send off his brother easily in one shot, to which the bald man agreed. Then the bald man apologized to him, but he just spat out his cigar and told the bald man that he knows they are just doing what they are told to do. He knows that his life has been full of anger and despair and he is still attached to it. Boxing was everything to him, and he had everything like height, punching power, and star quality. In high school, he was even called a promising prospect in the boxing world. But he couldn't ignore the provocations that came his way because he couldn't control his young blood. He was told that he could never box again and was shut down. He thinks there must have been other ways, and he might have been able to make a comeback because he knows that, at the very least, there was a way to make a living as a boxer. But he also knows that it is useless to regret it now. Still, if he had the chance, even just once more, he wants to do boxing one more time. Suddenly, he heard someone telling him that he was ashamed to be a boxing apprentice like him, but then someone called him Callie to wake him up and asked if he was dead. Then someone shouted that they didn't care if he died and that they should go, making him wonder who it was. 3 boys were panicky, running away, leaving a young man bleeding on the ground. The young man's eyes were empty, but then they woke up when Park Kang-tae's soul entered the young man's body, and he sprang up to catch his breath. Then he looked at his shaking hand, wondering what it was, knowing that he definitely died from being stabbed, and who was that body? A few days later, the man told the men that the losers of the match go to the mine. But if they won, they stay there in that August boxing apprentice school. The instructor named Nixar also told them that if they didn't want to go to the mine, they should train like they were going to die and listen carefully to the pairs he was assigning them to now. Then Nixar begins pairing Torres and Meros, Undat and Bizon, Kizo and Damien, Johnny and Caesar, and lastly, Slit and Callie. Then told them that the pairs called now would have a match in a week. The huge men laughingly replied to Nixar that it was clear, but the skinny men asked their captain if he was telling them to die. Park Kang-tae, who reincarnated as Callie, knows that Nixar called the inferiors against the superiors, and he can see Nixar's intention. The mine is a dangerous place where many people still die from accidents or lung disease in the 21st century, and the environment there is even worse. So he knows that he must avoid going to the mine at all costs. Suddenly, Nixar called his name, making him jump in shock, and told him to follow him because he had something to ask him to do separately. One of the superiors asked if Callie was getting special treatment again, and the other superior furiously replied that Callie is a jerk who can't even keep up with training. On the other hand, somewhere else, Nixar told him that he had submitted his name to the owner for discharge. He asked Nixar if it was true, but he was surprised that he was calm. Nixar told him that he was not a boxer and he had a small build, so the same goes for the mine. He'll die soon, making him think that with a body like his, he'll die in less than a year. Then Nixar told him that he'd recommend to the owner that he be sold to a different master, but he told Nixar that he'd go to the match in a week. Nixar asked him if he is really Callie because if it was usual, he would have already cried and cried, but he firmly told Nixar that he will definitely become a boxer. Then he confidently glared at Nixar, making Nixar smile, and told him that if that's the case, he wouldn't say anything more, but if he changed his mind, he could come to him anytime. Then he silently walked outside, thinking about Nixar, questioning if he is really Callie. But he knows that he is not because until recently, he was a gangster named Park Kang-tae who lived on Earth. He got a second chance as a boy named Callie, which is the opportunity to do boxing again. But he knows that his current body is frail with weak bones and insufficient stamina. His growth spurt is late, and his punches are weak. In addition, it seems that Callie has been subjected to a lot of bullying, and it must have been because of that frail body that it wasn't seen. This makes him wonder why he got a second chance with that body. Suddenly, someone called him from the side, and the superiors were glaring at him, making him realize that it was starting again. Then Slit punched his face and kicked him away while telling him that he has never liked a bastard like him. The fact that the instructor took him in as an exception is also a problem. Then Slit asked him what he was bragging about, his father being a champion, and told him that he should just die because he was just a weak, insignificant bastard. The other man who was looking at him thought he was pathetic, but then they noticed that he was still standing up, making them can't believe it because they know that Callie would have been beaten to a pulp if it was usual. While he was wondering how pathetic the owner of his body must have been, Slit teasingly told him that he only had to look at his face for a week, but he agreed and jokingly told Slit that it was because he was going to be dragged to the mine. This made Slit angry and he launched his fist to punch him again. He was stunned, realizing it was a massive fist, and with his current body, it was impossible to dodge it. He wondered how he could dodge it, but then he was surprised to see the fist slowly approaching him. Seeing it coming, he managed to dodge the punch in time, and he wondered if he had truly dodged it. The man who was observing them was also surprised and wondered what was happening. Slit became even more furious because he had avoided his attack and launched his fist once again. It was clear that he could see the trajectory of the fist, so he dodged the attack once more and skillfully avoided other attacks while getting closer to Slit, as he could also see when the guard was down. Then, he punched Slit's chest, making Slit stumble back, and the other superiors were shocked. But Slit grabbed his shirt and aimed for him, angrily calling him a weakling, then launched his fist toward his face, hitting him hard. After this, the superiors walked away with Slit telling him that nobody liked him being cocky. The man who had been watching them from the start observed for a while and then turned around to leave, leaving him alone on the ground, badly injured. However, he smiled and laughed heartily. He wondered why he hadn't noticed until now that something as important as body weight in boxing was eye-hand coordination and reflexes. The hand-eye coordination that can see every grain of sand that falls and follows its movement, and the reflexes that dodge all the punches. He knew he had a pretty useful corner and swore that he was not going to the mine because he would win and survive. 20 years ago, there was a rising revolt of the armored gladiators, and it was a challenging situation that even regular troops struggled to cope with. The kingdom, which had barely suppressed the rebellion, later abolished the slave gladiator system, and that's how fighters were born. He found out that in this world, the audience only took pleasure in fights where opponents were destroyed with fists. Moreover, his current body made it easy for him to get injured. A man told him that if he was already exhausted, he could run slowly, but he replied with a cough, insisting that he was fine. He knew that he had to do everything to survive because in that place, lacking strength meant certain death. Moments later, Nixar shouted to them that it was over and they should stop. This left him catching his breath in exhaustion, feeling frustrated, knowing that he could run better when he was drinking alcohol or smoking. On the other hand, Nixar, who observed him, wondered how the kid who always lagged behind was now in the middle of the pack. If Callie had been like this before, they wouldn't have let him go, making Nixar wonder what had happened to Callie. Then Nixar overheard one of the men asking his friend why Callie had run with all his might today after getting beaten up. The friend inquired back if he thought Callie was acting a bit strange after his head got hurt. Nixar asked them what they meant by Callie's head getting hurt, leaving the two men shocked. He inquired further if Callie got beaten by another group, and the men replied that they believed Callie got beaten harder than usual. They thought Callie was dead because he was bleeding from the head, nose, and more. Nixar wondered if it was changing Callie because he felt the specter of death. He knew they needed to wait and see a little longer, so he ordered the men to run 50 more laps, to which they immediately replied yes. In the afternoon, during individual training, Callie noticed that everyone was working hard to avoid going to the mine. He realized he had to work just as hard, but he understood that the training was ineffective. It was impossible for him to inflict significant damage with his current body. He knew he had to aim for a crucial area like the jaw because a well-placed jaw hit could shake the skull and make opponents fall. He needed to perfect his aim for the jaw. A man asked him what he was doing, and he replied that he was in the middle of training. The man questioned why he wasn't training like the others in their training camp. Callie suggested they train in a different style, similar to what they did in their training camp. The man called him cheeky and reminded him that they had been fighters even before he was born, so there was no value in ignoring the veterans. Callie knew that in that place, boxing was of the slugger type, much like a heavyweight fight in his world. He used to train with that style, but regular training wouldn't help his current body. The man told him to pick up the log and repeat it again and again. But then someone grabbed the man's shoulder and asked him to wait a minute. Then, Nixar asked Callie if he was learning it from his father, to which he nodded in agreement. Nixar told him that if that was the case, he could use that style in their training camp, and if it was the champion's style of training, there was something to learn from it. Then Nixar told him that he could keep that, and he agreed. Nixar thinks Kaviran is a champion, but he wasn't a boxer, and he wonders if Kaviran teaches Callie any other training methods. He also thinks that Callie must have changed after that day, and now Callie feels different. When the sun was about to set, he leaned against the tree tiredly, realizing that he couldn't handle it because he was weak. Then his stomach growled, making him feel hungry, and he craved something sweet. He noticed something above him and saw that he was leaning against an apple tree. He bit into one of the apples and exclaimed that he felt alive. But then someone asked him what he was doing there, and he was surprised to see a noble lady looking at him. He tried to say something, but he was too nervous. The lady told him that if he didn't have an explanation, he should pick an apple for her and come down because she wanted to eat one too. He immediately climbed down and gave her an apple. She took a bite and praised him, then asked him if he wasn't a slave in the training camp and if he didn't know that it was a noble family garden. She reminded him that if he got caught, he would be punished. Shatteringly, he replied that he really didn't know, knowing that if he got hurt, he couldn't compete. She smiled and introduced herself as Azalea Aegist, and her father was Baron Gadolf Aegist, who is his master. She ordered him to say his name, and he replied that he was Callie. She told him that she'd pretend she didn't see what he was doing today because he gave her that apple, but if he got caught again, she'd swing the whip herself. Then she ordered him to quickly leave that place before the others saw him, to which he thanked her and immediately ran away, thinking that it was a close call. Azalea watched him running away and noticed that he was small and looked weak for a boxing slave. Then she looked at the apple that Callie gave her and ate it while thinking about his name. The next day, Callie was busy training alone with his hands while the superiors were training using the log on the side. Slit noticed that Callie had changed and was attracting everyone's attention with his unconventional training. He also remembered that last day, Callie even hit him, and he knew that if it continued, it would be the end. This made him furiously throw the log he was carrying and ask one of the superiors if the instructor was supposed to come. The man replied that the master called them, so they left. Slit smiled upon hearing this, thinking that there was no harm in testing the opponents in advance. He told everyone that he had to show them who's the boss. Then, Slit was about to grab Callie from behind, thinking he'd start with Callie's annoying face and plan to smash Callie to the ground. However, Callie ducked in time to avoid it. He turned around to face Slit and launched his fist towards Slit's jaw, but he stopped in time and surprisingly apologized to Slit. He explained that he was so focused that he didn't notice him next to him. Worriedly, he asked Slit if he hit his face, and Slit replied no, saying he was fine. He told Slit that it was a relief and that he shouldn't get hurt before the match. Slit shook in fear. He told Slit that he'd go back to what he was doing but knew that Slit was a troublemaker. He remembered that when they were in the organization, he saw his share of guys like Slit. He swore that those who tried to act tough by making others look weak, he would crush them all. On the other hand, the man was busy training with a log, knowing that it wasn't a coincidence. Then the man walked towards Slit and asked Slit if he was worried because he looked pale. Slit shouted and asked the man what he was talking about. He told the man that he was lucky to have a wimp like Callie as his opponent, so nothing could be better than that. The man told Slit that it was true that Callie had changed because usually, Callie would whine and annoy them, and they would beat him up. But lately, he saw determination in Callie's eyes, indicating that he wouldn't lie like before. So, Slit better not be careless and let his guard down. This made Slit surprised, and he couldn't believe that even Torres was paying attention to Callie. Torres smiled upon seeing Slit's reaction and slammed Slit back, telling him that Callie was still Callie, so he shouldn't worry and should just send that trash to the mine. Slit confidently replied, of course, and said it was what he had to do. Meanwhile, in Gadolf's mansion, a man told Nixar that it seemed like the preparations for the match were going well. Nixar replied that they had even started living in the training facility. Gadolf asked Nixar if Torres was the promising one he mentioned and how Torres was. Nixar replied that Torres had a good balance of strength and agility. He was aggressive and skilled, and he had a good eye, which allowed him to overcome his weaknesses. Torres could even aim for the champion title. Gadolf told Nixar that he was looking forward to it and that there was something he wanted him to do, making Nixar ask Gadolf what it was. Gadolf explained that, as they knew, their training center's reputation had been declining, and they had been struggling financially. They had to send half of the slaves to the mines due to a lack of funds, so he wanted to invite commoners as spectators and raise some money. He believed that commoners must have missed watching the boxers fight and would surely enjoy it. Then he asked Nixar if he could show them a match worth watching. Nixar replied that he could, all while thinking that Gadolf was his master, but he considered Gadolf incompetent. Nixar knew that the reason the training center's reputation had fallen in the first place was due to Gadolf August Baron's greed. Gadolf had been running the training center for 15 years, and for the first 5 years, he was able to maintain it with the boxers he inherited from his ancestors. However, for the next 10 years, he forced them to fight too much, and they died out. August's territory was barren and had little farmland, so he had been relying on the training center's income to support his family, but now it was not enough either. Nixar thought about how things might have been different if Gadolf hadn't sent young boxers to the Kingdom Boxing Tournament 2 years ago. Then he remembered a man who had promised him that he would definitely win. But that man had died, making him frustrated. He thought that if Gadolf hadn't done it, the training center might have had a chance to rise again. Azalea told her father that she wanted to watch the match too and asked if he could prepare one more seat for her. Gadolf asked her what it was for and questioned whether she had not said she hated it because it was barbaric. She replied that sometimes she thought barbaric things were okay too. Nixar warned Azalea that it might be too stimulating for her, but she insisted that stimulating meant fun. Gadolf chuckled and told his daughter that she really wanted to see it badly. She was not usually interested in fights like these, but she wanted to see for herself how Callie fought. The day of the match arrived, and Callie entered the place, fixing his hand bandage, thinking that finally the time had come. A moment later, someone raised a hand in the air, and the people cheered loudly. Torres thought it was easy, and the match ended. On the other hand, up top, Nixar and Gadolf were watching. Gadolf told Nixar that it was a great fight and instructed him to train Torres well and make him a champion in just 1 year, to which Nixar agreed. Then the instructor shouted that the next and last fight would be between Slit and Callie. Azalea, who was watching the match, noticed that everyone was tall and muscular, but that kid named Callie was as skinny as a bone. She wondered if Callie thought he could become a fighter with that small body. Nixar told her that for a fighter, physique is an absolute factor because physical strength is directly related to power. However, there is still a way. Slit asked Callie why he didn't just surrender now, as if he fought Slit till the end, he wouldn't have good health anymore. But Callie told Slit that if his ability matched the way he talked, he'd already be a champion. He knows it's not that simple, and he can't find a place to hit Slit. He understands that the most significant challenge is the difference in physique. It won't do any good damage if he hits Slit's torso with his fist, so he needs to target Slit's jaw. To do that, he needs 2 things. Slit launched his fist to punch him, but he dodged it. He thought that first, he needed to make Slit's upper body bend like it was now. He continuously avoided Slit's punches, making the people watching shout at him furiously, telling him not to just run away and calling him a scaredy cat. They asked him what he was doing. Slit thought that by getting provoked by the viewers, he had almost lost all his stamina, but he wondered why Callie was fine. Then Slit launched his fist at him once again, calling him a small bastard. Callie was surprised, but he knew that it was part of his plan. He made Slit keep attacking him, which caused Slit to lose most of his stamina faster than Callie, who was just avoiding the attacks. Second, when Slit would lose his guard, he could strike his jaw. But then Slit grabbed his shoulder and launched his fist at his side. Callie was surprised because it was cheating. Slit's fist hit his side, and a few of his ribs broke. He shouted in pain and fell to the ground. The people cheered for Slit, while Callie wondered if everyone knew Slit was cheating because Slit had grabbed him with all his fingers, not his gloves. The instructor began to count down, and he thought that he never expected this to happen. He wondered what he should do. When the instructor counted down to 3, he pushed himself to stand up. Fortunately, he managed to get to his feet in time, although he wondered if his ribs were broken and how many were affected. However, he knew that wasn't the problem for now. The instructor asked him if he could still continue the fight, and he thought that he had already died once, so he would survive now. Slit told him that he'd regret standing up, but he just glared at Slit, knowing that his ribs were already broken, and he couldn't move freely. Then Slit launched his fist toward him again, making him think that it was the worst situation, and now that it had come to this, he would do whatever it took. He met Slit's fist using his head, causing Slit to shout in pain. Slit was surprised, and his hand was hurt too. He launched towards Slit, realizing that he needed to attack him. Slit, angrily, was about to attack him again, but he dodged it and saw that the chance was now his. He punched Slit's jaw with all his might, making Slit stagger back a little. But Slit just smiled at him and asked if he thought only one of his punches would kill him. Suddenly, Slit collapsed and fell to the ground. The instructor began to count him down, while the viewers were shocked and confused. When the countdown reached 0 and Slit didn't stand up, the instructor announced that the winner was Callie. The viewers were astonished and asked what was happening, but he was just glad that he was still alive. He swore that he wouldn't let his second chance at life go to waste. A week later, the slave traders arrived, and half of the apprentices were sent to the mine. The only exception among the inferior students was him. Now, there were only a little over 10 people left in the training ground, so the training center was quiet. Later, at August's mansion, Nixar told him that the shackles would be released when he returned to the training center. He looked around because it was his first time coming to August's mansion. Nixar asked him how his body was, and he replied that he was fine. Then he excused himself to ask Nixar why the lady had called him. Nixar replied that she seemed to be interested in him after the last match. A few minutes later, in Azalea's room, she greeted him and told him that they were meeting again. Then she ordered Nixar to stay outside for a while, and Nixar, confused, replied okay. After Nixar left, she told him to sit there, but he told her that he was fine. She told him not to refuse, as she didn't ask twice. He mentioned that he heard she had called him, and she responded by throwing some fruits at him, telling him that he was a bit impatient and should have some fruits. They began to talk, and he ate the fruit she had given, which made her look at him with a smile. Then she explained that she had called him because she had something to ask him. She inquired if he knew that slaves had no right to refuse. He replied yes, while thinking that Azalea was hard to read. She told him that he was amazing in the last match and did well with his thin arms. She also mentioned his one shot, but her father said it was luck and coincidence. She asked him if it wasn't, making him ponder that she was smart and quick because Slit's punch was a coincidence, but Then he told her that he shook his head, which left her confused as to what he meant by shook. He explained that if they hit the chin accurately with their fist, the head would shake, and the person would lose temporary control of their body. But it only applied when the impact was strong enough. She asked if he aimed and attacked, to which he replied yes. She smiled and praised him, then told him that she looked forward to his future moves, so he should keep winning and become a professional boxer. She also mentioned that if he became a champion, he might become a free person. He looked at his hands and the shackles fall to the ground, and thinks about what it meant to be a free person. The afternoon training session arrived, and Torres was training seriously while thinking about freedom because it was his goal. He swore that he would definitely achieve freedom. When Torres was 14 years old, Nixar told him that he would become strong enough. Otherwise, Nixar wouldn't have brought him from being a farmhand. He also had a natural physique and fighting spirit, so he should work hard to become a champion and a free person. He threw the log on the ground while thinking that he used to dislike guys like Callie who did pathetic things every day without a goal. However, when Callie suddenly changed, beat Slit, and survived, he realized that they never know what will happen in the world. Then someone told him that lately Callie was acting up, and they should teach him a lesson. Because of cowardly Callie, Slit had to go to the mine. A man named Kijo, with the nickname Mantis, told Torres that they should go beat up Callie. Torres replied that he was done and didn't care anymore. This made Kijo ask if he really didn't care and say that it was boring. Torres thought that if Callie wanted to change himself, he wouldn't bother Callie because he was just annoyed by Callie's begging. On the other hand, Callie was busy in a corner of the training room alone. He noticed that his ribs were completely healed now. He had started exercising around the time he recovered and had gained some muscle too. Then someone called him and told him that he had come out of the training ground after a long time. He just thought to himself that he had been wondering when they'd show up. Kijo asked him if it was fun to win easily, and he sighingly replied that it would be troublesome if they got hurt. Kijo teasingly told him not to be too scared because he'd go easy on him. However, he corrected Kijo, saying it was troublesome if he got hurt. This made Kijo angry, and he launched his fist to attack him, but he jumped backward in time to avoid it. Kijo tried to punch him again, but he avoided it once more while launching a counter-attack, then hit Kijo's jaw. Kijo coughed out blood and slowly fell. He was thinking that Kijo must have thought he won by pure luck. Then he told them in his mind that they were overconfident. With tall height and overwhelming reach, it felt like facing someone with a spear. His long jabs and punches made it nearly impossible to approach. He knew that having a long reach was a significant advantage, but Kijo had a large movement and a bent swing that didn't allow him to take full advantage of the reach. It meant that Kijo was essentially a big punching bag. He understood that he shouldn't give Kijo any breaks and needed to maintain the pressure, so he continued to punch Kijo. However, two more men suddenly appeared behind him, ready to attack. This surprised him, but he managed to avoid their attacks, wondering if the three of them were coming at him. Kijo told him not to get cocky with the punch he had landed by chance. Frustrated, he asked Kijo if he was resorting to numbers because he was at a disadvantage. This enraged Kijo, who tried to punch him, but he skillfully avoided it. Unfortunately, another man knee him from behind, making him realize that they were willing to gang up on him to maintain their self-esteem. He fell to the ground and looked up at them, recalling that he hadn't been much different from them before. Torres stood up and said that he couldn't stand it anymore. He asked Kijo why he was making a fool of himself in a one-on-one fight and told him that if he wanted to gang up on someone, he should have done it from the start. Kijo asked Torres why he was on Callie's side, and Torres replied that he didn't take anyone's side. He was simply annoyed by the guy who had been beaten by Callie and was now acting up. Kijo shouted that he hadn't been beaten and had just let his guard down for a moment. Torres challenged Kijo to have a one-on-one fight again, with him as the referee. Kijo confidently accepted, and then he gave Kijo a menacing glare with his sharp eyes, which made Kijo jump in horror, wondering if that kid was Callie. Kijo attacked him, but he easily avoided it and pointed out that it was a slow punch, finding it strange that Kijo couldn't dodge it. He continued to punch Kijo's side, and Kijo raised his fist to attack him again, telling him to shut up. Once more, he easily avoided Kijo's punches and told Kijo that he was wasting movements as well. Then he launched his fist toward Kijo's face, saying that Kijo was only showing his weakness. He punched Kijo's jaw, making Kijo dizzy, and he collapsed to the ground face first. Torres noticed that Callie looked like an experienced boxer. He knew that Callie's father was a champion, so Callie must have some talent. Callie called Torres, but Torres told him that they had nothing to do with each other. Still, Callie asked Torres if he didn't hate him and why he helped him. Torres just turned around, asking him if he had to explain that to someone like him, and told him to just get lost now. After that incident, there were no more guys who picked on him blatantly, and they implicitly acknowledged that Callie was one of the boxing apprentices. Meanwhile, in the August Mansion guest reception room, Gadolf shouted at someone not to worry and just proceed with the match as usual. Then someone came out of the room with a smile, leaving Nixar surprised. Nixar walked inside, calling Gadolf, and reminded Gadolf that he had told him to refuse that match because they only had apprentice boxers on their side. But Gadolf angrily asked him if he could stand it and told him that Dorman hadn't brought any proper boxers, so they might win if they did well. Nixar told Gadolf that there were two ways to handle it: either prepare the best members and fight, or send out a sacrificial lamb for the next round. But Gadolf angrily ordered him to pick the best three and come because he wanted to see Baron Dorman lose his temper. Nixar wondered how much more Gadolf had to ruin the training center before he came to his senses. He realized that if aces like Torres became disabled, the training center would be in jeopardy. He also noted that they had 3 days left to train the aces and prepare for the upcoming match. Later, Nixar called Torres, Kijo, and Kali to inform them that he had decided to train them and put them in a match against Dorman's training camp in 3 days. He chose them because they were the ones whom he and the other instructors believed were the best. Torres asked Nixar if he thought the team he was assembling would win, and Nixar remained silent for a moment, thinking about Gadolf. Finally, he told them that they had a ridiculously small chance of winning. Worried, Kijo asked Nixar if they would die if they lost, and Nixar replied that Gadolf wouldn't let them die because they were his property, but the opponents could certainly break their bones. He asked Nixar if he had called them because he believed they could win, but Nixar just told Torres that he would practice sparring with the other instructors repeatedly to gain more experience in the next 3 days. Torres nodded in agreement. Then Nixar told Kijo that he should find a way to handle his fear and train his mentality. Then lastly, Nixar tells Kali if he needs anything he can tell him and chosen him because of his recent improvement, so he didn't have a specific training plan for him. Upon hearing this, Kali told Nixar that he needed one person to help with his training. A moment later, Torres was being punched by someone, and the instructor advised him not to hold back because their opponents were experienced fighters. He emphasized that no matter how strong the opponents were, when Torres hit them, they would fall. The instructor also told Torres to act like a winner, even if his legs were shaking and he felt like collapsing. He needed to make the opponent believe that he was an indomitable force. Then the instructor suggested taking a break and continuing later. However, Torres noticed Kali on the side, making him wonder what Kali was doing in that training field. On the other hand, the laborer named Valkyra asked Kali if he was crazy and if he really meant to throw the stone. Kali simply told Valkyra to go ahead and do it, asking what he had just said. Valkyra replied that it was nothing and that he would throw the stone. Valkyra threw the stone at Kali, but Kali easily avoided it, causing the stone to hit the wall instead. Kali understood that it was a hit-or-miss situation, one of the key aspects of modern boxing. He knew that no matter how hard he trained in 3 days, there was no way he could gain muscles. Therefore, he planned to focus on training his footwork, weaving, and refining all of his reflexes, as they were his most critical weapons now. A moment later, he caught the stone that was being thrown at him while praising Valkyra for doing a good job. He told him that the training was over for the day, thinking that sharpening his body's reflexes was also a form of training for boxers. Then he arrived at their room and heard someone shouting that he would kill them all, with others trying to calm a man named Valky down. He was surprised by the situation and asked what was happening. Valky angrily told Dorman that he wouldn't forgive him. Kali asked Kijo what the hell was happening, but Kijo replied that he didn't know either. Kali urged Kijo to tell the truth because it was a serious situation. Kijo explained that fighters from Dorman's training camp had come by and mercilessly beaten them because they were angry about the match. However, there were no severe injuries, only bruises, so it was challenging for the instructors to handle. Kijo thinks they will be completely defeated. Valky shouted that Dorman and his fighters were sons of bitches and that he would kill them. Then Nixar appeared, shouting at Valky and furiously asking him if he was stupid. Nixar slapped Valky and told him that if they lost, it was over. He reminded Valky that he had already lost a fight. Nixar then encouraged them to become stronger than their opponents from now on. Kali realized that after training and living with them, he had formed a bond with his fellow trainees. He knew that from this point on, the fight wouldn't only be an event for the citizens, but also a battle for Gadolf's pride, and it was the clash between 2 training camps. 3 days later, at Augusta State Arena, a spectator commented to his friend about the buzzing crowd in the stands, noting that it seemed like half of the estate's residents had gathered there. Meanwhile, Nixar instructed Kijo, Torres, and Kali about the herbal tea in their hands, explaining it would relax them and provide strength. He advised them that if they believed they were going to lose, they should raise 2 fingers high, as it was better to have their pride hurt than to become crippled. Nixar then revealed the order. Kijo would go first, followed by Torres and Kali. He directed Kijo to get ready, which caused Kijo to spit out his tea and nervously question if he was really going first. Nixar simply pushed him into the ring, telling him to do well and return. Kali called out to Kijo, noticing his nervousness, and asked him why he was so tense. He advised Kijo not to let the opponent get close to him. However, Kijo was angry and questioned Callie, stating that they needed to be close to hit their opponents. The host announced Kijo's entrance into the ring, and the crowd cheered for August. Some in the audience wondered about Kijo's height when he was an apprentice, which made Kijo anxious. The host then introduced Kijo's opponent, Bass, a warrior from the Dorman Training Center with 14 wins. Bass called Kijo a kid and remarked that having long limbs didn't necessarily make one strong, making Kijo nervously shake. Kijo's stiffness worried Torres, while Callie expressed concern for Kijo. On the other side, Joshua laughed heartily, commenting that Kijo was tall but still just a kid. Baron Joshua Dorman teased Gadolf, asking if he agreed. But Gadolf, while angered, believed that the match had yet to begin. The host announced the start of the match, and Bass immediately lunged at Kijo to attack. Bass threw a punch at Kijo, but Kijo managed to dodge it. He avoided another attack from Bass, who was smiling and eager to engage. However, the audience expressed their frustration, questioning if Kijo was a real man and whether they had come to see such a performance. Kijo, frustrated, cursed them in his thoughts, knowing that anyone could talk. Suddenly, Bass appeared right in front of Kijo, launching an attack and questioning how long Kijo intended to run away. Kijo instinctively covered his face with his hands, but Bass managed to land a punch on his chest, causing Kijo to shout in pain. Bass considered Kijo pathetic for falling for such a trick. He then followed up with a punch to Kijo's face, which made Callie, Torres, and Nixar worryingly stand up in response. Kijo fell to the ground hard, and Bass proudly raised his hands in victory. However, the audience expressed their disappointment, criticizing Kijo's performance and urging him to get up quickly or even contemplate giving up entirely. The referee began the countdown, and Kijo wondered how he could possibly win. Then he looks to his side and notices that Gadolf is glaring at him. Bass was confused when he sees Kijo gets up, and Kijo knew that if he gave up without throwing a punch, it would likely mean being kicked out of the training center. Bass, teasingly, asked if Kijo still had the will to fight, but Kijo told him to shut up and reminded himself that he was a boxer too. He told himself to calm down and follow the instructor's advice. He recalled Nixar's words, in which Nixar questioned why he lost to Callie. Nixar noted that it wasn't a fight he should have lost, especially given his advantageous physical attributes. Nixar pointed out that Kijo had failed to use his height and long limbs effectively, likely losing his composure and becoming impatient, which allowed Callie to get too close. Nixar advised him to stay calm, not be afraid, prevent the opponent from getting too close, and intercept the attacking opponent. With this advice in mind, Kijo used his long arm to punch Bass in the face, causing Bass to stumble in shock. Callie, Torres, and Nixar cheered for Kijo. Even Kijo couldn't believe that he had landed a punch successfully, but he felt confident that his fist had struck Bass. Kijo continued to punch Bass, taking advantage of the situation, while the crowd loudly cheered for him. Callie observed that Kijo was now more flexible and faster, having reduced unnecessary muscle stress, making his attacks even more threatening. Kijo's agility and speed were evident, and his attack style was akin to that of a mantis. Bass was ready to retaliate, but Kijo's height presented a challenge, and it was hard for Bass to mount a defense. Bass knew that he had to hit Kijo harder than Kijo was hitting him to secure victory, but Kijo skillfully avoided Bass's attacks and smiled, knowing he had the upper hand. Kijo launched his fist into the open space on Bass's face, delivering a powerful blow that sent Bass falling to the ground and collapsing. The crowd erupted in cheers, leaving Kijo both surprised and overwhelmed. He immediately looked for Nixar in the audience, and upon seeing Nixar nodding and smiling, Kijo raised his hand with tears in his eyes and jubilantly shouted that he had won, prompting more cheers from the spectators. Gadolf teased Joshua about their apprentice's victory and asked if Joshua had seen it. Joshua responded with frustration, reminding Gadolf that they still had 2 fighters to compete. Gadolf instructed Valkyra to convey a message to Nixar, emphasizing the consequences of losing and mentioning sending the losers to the mine. Valkyra delivered Gadolf's message, leaving Nixar frustrated. Nixar then informed Callie and Torres about Gadolf's threat, assuring them that he would persuade Gadolf later and suggesting that if they felt in danger, they should surrender immediately. However, Torres confidently declared that there was no need for Nixar to persuade Gadolf, as he would win. Callie noticed Torres' determination, but he also realized that Malga, Torres' opponent, was on a different level than Bass. Soon, Torres and Malga faced each other in the ring. Malga offered Torres advice, noting that he was different from Bass and suggesting that Torres give up to avoid getting hurt. Torres responded by telling Malga not to say anything and challenged him to fight. When the referee initiated the match, both fighters immediately launched their fists at each other. The audience, including Callie, was shocked to see both Torres and Malga landing simultaneous punches on each other, resulting in blood being splattered around the ring. Unfortunately for Torres, Malga's strength proved superior, pushing him back. Despite the odds, Torres managed to hold his ground and exchanged punches with Malga once again, creating an exhilarating moment for the audience. Torres, with a smile, asked Malga how many hits he had taken, trying to project confidence even if he was on the verge of exhaustion. Malga acknowledged that Torres was used to facing more active fighters but vowed not to let him win. He then launched another attack, deliberately using his elbow to hit Torres, which led to Torres bleeding. Torres confronted Malga about the elbow strike, calling it cheating. Malga brushed it off as an accidental outcome that often occurred during matches. Despite this, Torres wiped the blood from his head and replied, "Okay," while secretly seething about how the situation had unfolded. Malga thinks 18 fighter collapsed into his hands, and although he failed to become an A-class fighter, he was still proud to be a veteran. But Torres was only an apprentice fighter, making him wonder why isn't Torres going down while Torres attacked him. The audience happily cheered and shouted that Torres was no different from a wild boar. Callie knows that Torres is barbaric but is incredibly strong and noticed that the level between Torres and Malga are different. Torres launched his fist toward falling Malga and hit him in the face hard, making Malga blood spread out everywhere and his few teeth were pulled out. Then Malga collapsed on the ground and he defeated Malga. Nixar praised Torres for his good work and told him that it was a great game. Also, it met the audience's expectations, but Torres just catches his breath in exhaustion and pain. He told Torres that he did a good job, but then Torres called him and told him that their victory was now based on his performance. He replied of course and confidently told Torres that he'd end it and come back. Then the host told everyone that the last fighter from Dorman training camp and the fighter with 11 victories named Burrito entered the stage, and the fighter from Aegis named Callie entered the stage. The audience disappointedly encouraged him that he wouldn't win and their house was bigger than him. But Valkyra cheeringly told him that they should win it, and Valkyra was surprised by his words too, so he covered his mouth without realizing that Azalea heard him. She asked Valkyra if he know Callie, and Valkyra replied that yes, because he helps Callie during training, and Callie asked him to help throw stones at him while he avoids them. But then Joshua says that Callie was a bone and they just let their guard down before, but he think that time they'll win easily. Gadolf teasingly told Joshua that it will be disappointing if they didn't win that time, making Joshua shake in anger. Azalea was also expecting Callie to fight as she looked at him in the ring, facing Burrito. Burrito apologized to him because he wouldn't let him win. Then, Burrito swiftly jumped toward Callie and appeared in front of him, taking him by surprise. However, Callie managed to jump in time to avoid Burrito's attack, realizing that Burrito was faster and more dangerous than he had expected. He quickly jumped to the side to gain a better position, but was surprised to find that Burrito was blocking his movements. Realizing that he was cornered, he launched his fist to attack, knowing that he needed to escape at any cost. He landed several punches on Burrito, but Burrito told him that his punches were weak. The audience became angry and shouted at Burrito to fight properly, considering Callie just a beginner. They questioned why he wasn't using his fists, especially as a fighter with 11 wins. Burrito glanced at the audience silently, but then Callie teasingly reminded him that he wouldn't let him win, so he better use his fists properly. Burrito was aware that Callie was using the audience, and he couldn't figure out what Callie was after. However, he was determined to crush him and launched an attack. He glared at Burrito's fist, knowing that an attack was imminent. He successfully dodged Burrito's first attack, then the second, and even the third, leaving the audience shocked and Burrito confused, wondering if Callie was truly just an apprentice with such sharpened senses. Meanwhile, Joshua was furious, calling Burrito a punk and wondering how Burrito couldn't land a single punch on Callie, who was just a skinny apprentice fighter. Azalea smiled, knowing that Callie was different from the typical apprentice fighter, silently urging him to show everyone that he was indeed unique among the fighters. Burrito was angry and attacked him again, but he noticed that Burrito always used the right jab, so he easily and quickly avoided it. Then he saw that Burrito's next attack was a left hook and a right uppercut, and he avoided all of them. He remembered Valkyra asking him why he was avoiding these punches, but he asked Valkyra if he wanted him to get hit all the time. He told him to look at his body and explain that if he got hit by those punches, he'd break into pieces. Valkyra told him that it wasn't what he meant. He explained that in the end, if he didn't punch his opponent, he wouldn't win. He explained to Valkyra that he would avoid the punches while waiting for the perfect time. This made Valkyra confused, and he asked what he meant by the perfect time. He replied that it was about watching his opponent's movements and analyzing their patterns. He figured out that Burrito would first prepare his foot for a step, move his upper body for a punch, and then he analyzed his shoulder, chest, and waist before he was ready to attack. He didn't know if his fragile body could endure the hit, but he was confident that his experience and body sense could help him win. Then, he punched Burrito in the face, making Burrito's nose bleed. He followed it with a punch to Burrito's cheek, not giving Burrito a chance to recover. The audience, Nixar, and the masters couldn't believe that he had hit Burrito for the second time. Valkyra was also surprised, thinking about analyzing patterns because he saw that Callie had really done it. Burrito was on his knees, wondering how it could happen. He told Burrito in his head not to stand up because he couldn't use his right hand anymore, and that he should give up so they could move forward. However, Burrito furiously slammed his hand on the ground and stood up, calling him a son of a bitch. This left him in a position of frustration. Burrito told him that he was like a rat and that he would crush him without him realizing that Burrito was holding sand in his hand. Then Burrito threw sand into his eyes, thinking that no matter how fast he was, if he couldn't see, it would be his end. Azalea shouted that it was cheating, but Joshua just told her that it was Callie's fault for not being careful, and it was natural that when they fell, they got sand in their hands. On the other hand, Callie was frustrated because he really couldn't get used to the boxing fight there. He tried to open his eyes, but it hurt too much. Suddenly, Burrito punched his face, sending him flying into the distance. Burrito told him that he was nasty, but he just stood up with his eyes closed and faced Burrito once again. Burrito ran toward him, shouting that it was the end, but he didn't move from his position, knowing that he needed to stay calm because his analysis was already done. He knew that Burrito always starts with the right jab. Then he launched his fist toward Burrito and punched him in the face with all his might, making Burrito bleed and slowly fall. Burrito collapsed to the ground, defeated. The referee began to count down, and when the referee hit 0 and Burrito didn't stand up, he raised his hand in victory, shouting, making Azalea shocked. She had come all the way there to experience that sensation. Nixar patted his head and proudly told him that he couldn't believe they had won. Baron Joshua Doryman, whose pride had fallen, left the territory quickly, and Gadolf, who felt joy, gave them 3 whole pigs as rewards. 2 months later, the harvest season had come. Kijo put down a box of vegetables on the ground and angrily asked if they were farmers or fighters. He told Kijo that he was complaining too much and should think of it as strength training. Also, Callie's body had gone through many changes. A moment later, he placed the last box of vegetables on the table, and the farmer smiled, telling him he did a good job. The farmer suggested he take some with him, to which Callie thanked him. Then, the farmer asked if they were going to the harvest festival of Duke Wesley, and Kijo replied no because they were still apprentices, so they had to wait another year to go. The farmer said it was too bad because he wanted to see their matches again. He asked Kijo what they were planning to do at the harvest festival as he waved goodbye to the farmer. Kijo responded by asking if he was silly and explained that the highlight of the harvest festival is boxing, and their master is one of the Duke's relatives. Kijo further mentioned that Dorman and August were competing under his sponsorship, with Dorman currently having the upper hand. He pretended to remember, but Kijo teasingly asked him if he'd been hit on the head hard before. Callie then glanced back at the mansion, realizing it had been a year. Meanwhile, in August's mansion reception room, Nixar tried to persuade Gadolf to give him 1 more year. He told Gadolf that the last match was well prepared but that he was lucky. Gadolf, in response, mentioned that a letter had arrived from the Duke's house, and they must have heard about their last victory. The Duke wanted to see the 3 apprentices, and if they refused, it wouldn't be good for them. Nixar understood that Duke Wesley was one of the 5 dukes in the kingdom, and they couldn't possibly refuse. He replied, "I understand." Gadolf told him that they would depart for the Duke's house with an escort the day after tomorrow, so they should get ready. From now on, those 3 were official boxers, so he should mark them. A moment later, Callie felt that the mark on his shoulder was still sore, but as long as he could box, it didn't matter. Then, they continued on their journey. Suddenly, someone congratulated Callie for becoming an official boxer. Azalea told him that thanks to him, she could walk alongside the nobles. He asked her if she was talking about him, and she replied yes, for which he thanked her. She stared at him, making him confused, but then she told him that he had changed a lot and should show his training results at the harvest festival. Kijo asked him if their lady wasn't pretty and mentioned that her red hair and full lips showed her beauty from afar. Callie remembered her expressions and realized that she was indeed pretty. Torres told Kijo to watch his mouth unless he wanted to face their master's anger, but Kijo asked Torres what he was so worried about and suggested that Torres actually liked him. This made Torres angry, and he attacked Kijo from behind. Kijo told Torres he got the message, defeatedly. The knights told them to be quiet. The night arrived, and the captain of the knights told everyone that they should stop there to take a break and then leave. Kijo, irritated, asks why they are going around the mountain, and the bugs are sticking to him. He just asks Kijo back, who would have known that the bridge collapsed because of the rainstorm. Kijo asks them back, what if bandits show up? On the other hand, inside the carriage, Gadolf tells Azalia that the sun sets quickly in the mountains, so she should go to sleep first. Then Gadolf told the captain of the knights that they'd leave early tomorrow morning, and the knight replied that it was harvest season now, so the bandits were rampant. He should hurry. But Gadolf asked the captain of the knights if it wasn't because of those bandits that he pays them. While they were busy talking, he heard something and wondered if it was a rustling sound. Kijo shouted that something moved in the bushes, and he told Gadolf that they should leave now, making Gadolf ask them what it was and where they thought they were going. Suddenly, someone threw something at the captain of the knights, and a swarm of sharp arrows flew in their direction. Gadolf panicky shouted that it was an attack, and the knight immediately protected Gadolf. Nixar, who was hiding in the bush, told them to come there, but he noticed that the arrow shower stopped and saw that there were too many bandits approaching them. He told Nixar that they didn't have enough soldiers, so if he unlocked their chains, they'd fight with him, to which Torres and Kijo agreed too. Nixar got the key to their chains and freed them while telling them to only subdue the ones who approached them, and protecting Gadolf and the lady is their priority. Suddenly, one of the bandits attacked Kijo with a sword while shouting that he found them. Fortunately, he blocked it in time with the chain on his wrist and punched the man in the face. He told them not to just stand there and they should go. Torres wrapped the chain around his arm while saying that Kali was a crazy bastard, and Kijo told Torres that Kali was definitely not an ordinary guy. On the other hand, he was running fast toward the carriage, knowing that he had to find Gadolf and Azalia. The knights grabbed Gadolf, who was trying to free himself from them, but the knight told him that they had to go quickly, making him realize that Gadolf is safe. But then Gadolf shouted that Azalia was still in the carriage, making him surprised and immediately run toward it. But he noticed that one of the bandits was already approaching it, so he shouted to the man to stop. The man just smiled at him and swung the sword at him. Fortunately, he blocked it using the chain on his arm, but he still got thrown to the ground hard, realizing that the man had strong power. Then the man opened the carriage door, making Azalia surprised and shout in fear, which he heard. Then the man came out of the carriage holding a collapsed Azalia in his hand. When he saw Azalia didn't move, he shouted and worriedly called her name. Then the man ran away speedily while holding Azalia. Gadolf asked the knights what they were doing and ordered them to help Azalia. However, the knight didn't move and told Gadolf that he'd be back in a bit. A few minutes later, the man ran toward the cliff while he was telling him to stop and that there was nowhere else to go. The man put down Azalia while telling him that he looked like a slave and pointed the sword at him while asking if he wanted to come with them. He just asked the man why he would point a sword at him when recruiting him and told the man that if he comes with him, he would end up doing nothing more than banditry. The man positioned himself and told him that it was the end of the story. He noticed that it was a trained move and asked the man if he was a gladiator. The man jumped toward him to attack him while telling him that he was a gladiator with 42 wins. He knew that it was impossible to fight the man head on, making him wonder if he should fight him or pass him. The man swung his blade at him, but he jumped back in time to avoid it. Then he speedily ran toward Azalia, making the man surprised. But he just grabbed Azalia from ground and told the man that he felt sorry for him because he had no intention of fighting, while jumping off the cliff with Azalia. Then they fell into the ocean, leaving the man alone looking at them. A moment later, he called Azalia to wake up and was glad that she was breathing. She slowly opened her eyes and sat up in shock, making him glad that she had regained consciousness. He asked her if she was all right. A few minutes later, he told her what had happened, and she told him that she clearly remembered that one-eyed man who hit her, while he was busy thinking that he never thought he would use the camouflage techniques he learned in the military there. She told him that they should at least light some fire, but he told her that it was not possible because the trees were all moist, and worst of all, they might get caught, making her say that he was incompetent. He was surprised when he saw her shaking from the cold and thought that her body temperature must have dropped a lot because of the wet clothes. He told her that if she kept wearing wet clothes, she would catch a cold, and she'd feel less cold if she took off her clothes. This made her shyly ask him if he was telling her to take off her clothes and called him a shameless bastard. He assured her that he didn't mean it that way, he was just saying that it's better than freezing to death, and he'd turn his back. She told him that he had become quite bold, and he replied that it was because right now he had to protect her, and if anything happened to her, Gadolf would kill him. She told him not to look back and that she'd kill him if he turned around, to which he agreed. The truth was his head was spinning as he heard her taking off her clothes. Then he asked her if she was feeling less cold, but she still shivered from the cold. She noticed that even though he was freezing, he could see his lips turning blue, and his body was shaking with cold. He told her there were two ways to warm up, either move their bodies to raise body temperature or stick their bodies together. She replied that it was okay and she was fine, but then she was surprised to see him doing push-up from the ground. He stood up and excused himself to her. Suddenly, he put his arm around her, which made her surprised, and she shyly asked him what he was doing. He reminded her that he had told her they needed to stick their bodies together because it was said to be a way for soldiers to endure the cold during winter marches. He He told her that she might not like it, but if something happened to her, he'd be in trouble. She silently sat next to him. The next morning, he told her that it seemed safe around there and asked if she could walk. She asked him if he was going to carry her if she couldn't, making him realize that Azalea was still acting tough. Suddenly, her stomach growled with hunger, and she shyly said she couldn't help it because she hadn't eaten anything since last night. Later, near the river, he asked her if she'd like to have some. Then he cut the raw fish he had caught in the river and gave her a piece of its meat. At first, she felt disgusted, but when she tasted it, her expression changed. After that, they continued to walk, and he told her that if they headed upstream, they'd be able to rejoin their group. She asked him what if they encountered the bandits first, but he told her to leave it to luck, making her say that it was irresponsible. He assured her that he always did his best, and, after all, he was just wishing her luck. She thought that Callie was not like a slave or a typical boy. He was enigmatic and seemed to learn things in his unique way. She shyly told him that the more she knew him, the more mysterious he became. He asked if she said something, but she just told him to keep looking straight while walking. Meanwhile, a man was furious because he was trying to secure the ransom. But that little bastard appeared. He swore that he'd kill him if he saw him again. Suddenly, the man heard footsteps from behind, and he immediately stood up upon hearing someone saying that they would meet the soldiers soon. Then the man opened the grass in front of him and saw Azalea, telling Callie that it was the third time she had heard that sound. The man thought it was a heaven-sent opportunity. Callie and Azalea were surprised when they heard someone saying that they said even tigers would come if they told them to. The man told Callie that it was really nice to meet him. He faced the man to protect Azalea, and the man asked him if he was planning to fight him without even a weapon, calling him a laughable bastard. The man was surprised to hear the man tell him that he'd kill him and take that special prize. Then the man asked Azalea why she didn't have a chat with him before he sold her, making her shake in fear. He told the man that he was dreaming too high and asked him who said he was going to let him take her. He thought that the chains had floated away when he fell into the river, so depending on them was impossible for him. The man teasingly called him a little boy and told him that they should cut him down first. Then the man swung his sword toward him, and fortunately, he avoided it, but it cut his hair and his clothes. The man told him that he was fast and teasingly asked him how long he could avoid it. Then the man continuously attacked him with the sword, and he continuously avoided the strikes. However, when the man turned his body around, he didn't dodge the man's kick because he didn't expect it, and he slammed onto the ground hard, making Azalea worriedly shout to him to watch out. He was surprised that the sword was near his face, but luckily he rolled to the side in time to avoid it, and he immediately stood up. He realized that the sword had high killing power and long range, but he already knew about the law of destruction. He knew that against a player with long arms, guns, and knives, if he wanted to win with his bare hands, he had no choice but to move forward. The man teasingly told him that he understood that he was sticking his neck out, but Azalea knew that the man was wrong. The man swung his sword at him, but he speedily jumped to the man's side to avoid the attack and found an open space. He then punched the man's side, making the man growl in pain. The man swung his blade toward him in anger while shouting that they should take it to the end. He jumped backward to avoid it, knowing that what he needed now was the courage to face the blade, and his nose was lightly cut by the sword. He also knows that he needs determination to move forward. The man once again slashes in his direction, but he jumps to the side, and the man notices that he is aiming for his blind spot. Then he punches the man in the jaw, making the man cough up blood. Straight away, he grabs the man's shoulder and slams him hard on the ground, making the man shout in pain. He doesn't stop and punches the man in the face, elbows the man, and continuously punches him until he's exhausted and can't move anymore. He leans against a nearby tree while the man is badly beaten near another tree. The man still tries to grab his sword next to him and furiously swears that he'd definitely kill Callie. Then a shadow appears in front of the man and grabs his sword, making the man panic. Azalea lifts the sword and says that the man tried to disgrace her, and then she stabs the man with the sword, leaving Callie surprised. Shakingly, she tells him that even killing the man 100 times is not enough, which leaves him stunned and realizing that Azalea is not normal either. After dealing with the boss, they were found by the rescue team and were able to return safely. Nixar, who was applying ointment to his cut, told him that he was lucky because if he had cut a little higher, he would have been blind. He teasingly told Nixar that he looked more manly and nice. Suddenly, someone called him, and Gadolf thanked him for saving his daughter. He couldn't believe that Gadolf was thanking a slave, and he replied that it was his duty. Gadolf told him to sit down and rest and made it clear that it was an order because he deserved it, and had the right to do so. Then, Gadolf angrily says that those pathetic knights don't know what even a young slave knows, while glaring at the knights behind him. Gadolf then tells him that it's amazing that he fought and won against a gladiator. He asks if he has any secrets, and he replies that it helps to look weak because they always underestimate him. They rescued Azalea from the bandits and earned their loyalty. They were able to ride in a carriage, and finally, they arrived at the Wesley Duchy. Duke Wesley cheerfully told Gadolf that it had been a long time since they had seen each other and that they had traveled a long way. Gadolf thanked Wesley. Wesley noticed that Azalea was there too and told her that she had become a lady who looked just like her mother. She replied that she was honored that he remembered her while he stood behind her. Before that, she told him that one of the servants was sick in bed, so he'd have to serve instead. He was the best fit because the others had ugly faces and bulky bodies that couldn't be made into servants. A minute later, the nobles were sitting at a long table. Wesley asked Gadolf if it was true that August won all 3 matches in the last boxing match and told him that he heard they were all apprentices. Gadolf replied that it was embarrassing and those apprentices were now official boxers. Then the nobles began to chat with each other, making Azalea feel left out and sigh in boredom. Then she whispered something to her father and ordered Callie to follow her, making him surprised but replying with a yes. Later, they were out on the street, and she said that she thought she was going to suffocate and die. She told him that she didn't want to come in the first place, so they should let them talk among themselves. He told her that she looked unhappy. She told him that her father is obsessed with finding her a husband and asked him if it isn't horrible to be tied down at a young age. He told her that what he thinks doesn't matter, making her sigh. Then she saw 2 candies and gave one to him, asking if he had never tasted it before, making him realize that he hadn't eaten anything sweet except fruits since he came to that world. He put the lollipop in his mouth and told her that it was delicious. She beautifully reminds him that she told him, and he shyly replies with a yes. He thinks that she was born with beauty, otherwise she wouldn't get so much attention. But then he notices an old woman and wonders why she is staring at him. The old woman asks Azalea if she can read her fortune, and he tells her that they should go, but she replies no because it sounds fun, and she has never had her fortune read before, so they should go see it. Then they follow the old woman, who is laughing and telling her that she'd give her a cheap price. Azalea looks around and excitedly says that it's the gypsy tent she had only heard of, while he is busy wondering what the old woman is up to. The old woman tells Azalea that her life is not sailing smoothly and there will be many twists and turns. She replies that it's good and it would be boring if her life were like everyone else's. Then she also tells the old woman to look at her marriage or love fortune, too, making Callie realize that whether it's there or on Earth, fortune telling can drive people crazy. The old woman tells her that her partner might be close by, but she won't be able to have the love that everyone blesses her with, making her blush and leaving Callie confused. Then the old woman offers to read that boy's fortune for her as a service. He initially replies no and says he's fine. She tells him not to be cold and that it's for free. Also, he has nothing to lose, so he sits down, and the old woman begins to read his fortune using the crystal ball. The old woman sighs and tells him that he has come from very far away, from a place that people there can't even imagine, making him surprised. He asks the old woman where he came from, but the old woman replies that she doesn't know it and she just says what she sees. Azalea asks the old woman what she sees, and she replies that she sees a metal that flies in the sky, a carriage that moves without a horse, and a human inside a box. He stands up in shock, wondering what the old woman is saying and if she sees a glimpse of his past. The old woman told him that there was an unusual energy hanging over him, and he seemed to have an angel by his side. Azalea told him that he had the fortune to become a fighter, and maybe that's why he had won so far. He told her that it was just a superstition, and if she believed it, she would be a fool. She poutingly looked at him and said she also knew that, and he should not cross the line because he was just a slave. Panicky, he apologized to her, while the old woman couldn't believe that he was just a slave because she knew that a man with that kind of energy wouldn't end up just becoming a slave. In the next 3 days, he needed to soothe Azalea's anger, and finally, he went back to the slave dorm. He thought he could train as soon as he arrived, but the knights teasingly asked him if he was a real fighter because he was a skinny guy. They told him that even his dog could be a fighter, making him wonder why these guys were picking a fight with him. He asked them if he could just go in, but one of the knights told him that he would if he crawled under his foot, while the other one laughed hard. He asked them if they had ever been hit by a fighter and told them to stop picking a fight with him. One of the knights got pissed and asked how a slave like him dared to be arrogant, then launched a spear at him. But then someone shouted at the knight to stop and asked what it was. The knights were shocked to see Wesley behind him and asked Wesley how a slave could come to a citizen's place. Wesley told them that Callie belonged to his customer, Baron Ajust, and asked them if they wanted to stain his face, leaving the knights stunned in fear. Wesley told him that when he first saw him, he didn't believe he was a fighter and asked if he was one of the fighters who defeated Dorman's fighter. He replied yes, but he jumped in shock when Wesley touched his body and told him that his shoulder muscles were strong. Still, he didn't believe he was one of the fighters who defeated them. Then Wesley asked him what he was hiding, making him shock. But Wesley quickly smiled and apologized to him, saying he was just really excited to meet one of the fighters. Then he told him that he'd stop now before it got boring. Wesley walked away, telling him that he would see him at the match, leaving him wondering what the hell it was. Later, in the accommodation for the slaves and fighters, he was training. Thinking that when he had so many things on his mind, he expected that training was the best. He was doing a push-up with one hand, upside down. Suddenly, someone called him, and Torres teasingly asked him if it was nice to live in the castle for 3 days. He replied that he was dying of frustration. Nixar told them that the place they were standing was a big one, bigger than their previous training area. It's not only Dorman's slave fighters training camp, but also stray fighters, so if they were lucky, they might not play, and they might be left because the round is full. Torres asked Nixar if they were on the lucky side, and Nixar replied that for now, they were, but they were 100 years early to deal with the other fighters gathered there. Torres asked Nixar if he was telling him to stay still in the training camp when he was ready to win everything now. Nixar looked at Torres for seconds and sighed in frustration. Suddenly, Nixar kicked Torres in the stomach and angrily asked Torres if it was funny when they were probably going to end up dead before their debut. Then he told Torres not to joke around and explained the fact that there are many boxers who have won dozens of times in a row, which means dozens of boxers were buried underneath. So, if it's not because of the match, he'll kill them with his hands. Torres stood up and told Nixar that he'll keep it in mind and apologize to him. Nixar told them that no matter how good a fighter was, they lose focus sometimes during the match, which is why he was worried about Kijo. But Kijo shouted that he was okay. Suddenly, they heard someone shout that it was an ogre and Dorman's ogre had come, making Nixar shocked and immediately turn around to look at it. Then they saw a huge guy in the center of the other men, and Nixar said that Joshub had sharpened his sword, and he couldn't believe that Joshub brought that ogre. Kijo fearfully asked what the hell it was and if it was a human. Nixar replied that people compared him to be at the same level as a monster. Callie wondered if the huge guy is a person, and doesn't that guy really look like an ogre from a fantasy world while looking at Dorman's ogre, a fierce fighter who has won 76 times in a year. Kijo counted the 76 wins in 1 year, and Nixar told Kijo that the ogre must have fought 3 to 4 times a day. Nixar told him that there are rumors that ogres can rip someone's ribs off with just their bare hands and asked them if it made sense that the guy was called an ogre. Kijo worriedly asked Nixar if they wouldn't be in danger and if their master couldn't do something about it because if they fought the ogre, they might die. Nixar told them that actually, their master said it was too early to let them fight the ogre, so there was a possibility that they wouldn't have to go up against it. Torres said that it was interesting, and the guy's nickname, Ogre, doesn't feel like an exaggeration at all. It's like they're dealing with a different species, which left Kijo stunned in fear. But then Kijo tried to laugh and asked Callie if he didn't want to fight the ogre like him. However, Callie replied that if his fist didn't touch the ogre's jaw, he'd need to make the ogre bend his body, but he wondered how. He guessed that maybe he'd lose his stamina first but thought that hitting other parts wouldn't do much damage because the size difference was so great. Honestly, he couldn't think of a way to fight the ogre. Kijo wondered if they were crazy and if they really wanted to fight that monster. He also noticed that Callie sometimes felt different and had some barbaric side, making him think that Callie was different from an ordinary human. Later, the nobles gathered in front of the task board, and someone told them that it was the match schedule, so they should check if it was written correctly. Joshub told Gadolf that it would be tough and they would meet again this time. Joshub teasingly told Gadolf that everyone would give up in front of the ogre, but Gadolf just laughed and told Joshub to see the match later. Nixar praised Gadolf and told him that if he fell for Joshub's provocation, he would only lose his fighters. Gadolf replied that he also knew it and wondered who was crazy enough to fight a monster like the ogre, knowing the reason why Dorman Ogre is so famous. Joshub teasingly told Gadolf that he was trying to give respect to the 3 fighters last time, and they would see. Nixar asked Gadolf what Joshub meant and if he wanted the 3 of them to die. Gadolf replied that he heard Joshub made his 3 fighters fight the ogre, so Joshub must be serious this time. But Nixar knew that it was actually a death sentence for them. Gadolf asked Nixar if they didn't come there to see the match schedule, and Nixar replied yes. Then Nixar told Gadolf that Torres was on the first day, Callie and Kijo were on the second day. Also, the ogre was on the first day, but he had no fight with them. Gadolf told Nixar that it was a pity for the other Baron's fighter who would face the ogre, to which Nixar agreed. The first day match at Wistry Stadium had the man stunned in fear as he faced the enormous ogre. He pleaded with Ogre not to come any closer, and his fear forced him to retreat, eventually pinning himself inside the ring. In front of him stood Ogre, glaring menacingly. Ogre launched a punch to attack the man, and, by sheer luck, the man ducked to evade it. but as he cautiously looked back, he saw that the ring pillar had been obliterated. Joshua scolded Ogre, calling him a troublemaker, and he had asked Ogre not to destroy the pillar. Joshua smiled and apologized to Wesley while secretly praising Ogre in his mind, urging him to show everyone what he was made of. Meanwhile, Callie told Kijo that he could understand why the man had earned the nickname Ogre. To him, Ogre doesn't feel like a human at all. The man sat trembling in fear on the ring, while the crowd cheered for Ogre to kill his opponent, making the man sweat uncontrollably. The terrified man attempted to surrender and let Ogre win, but Ogre ignored his plea. Instead, Ogre launched his fist towards the man, causing the man to scream in fear. Upon impact, blood splattered everywhere, further inciting the cheers of the spectators. Callie had witnessed many deaths in fights prior to coming to this place, but he had never seen anything as gruesome as this. Ogre's bare hands turned the fight into a brutal spectacle, like a battle between a human and a beast. Fortunately, Ogre didn't possess any refined fighting skills. At this point, Kijo called his name and inquired if he was still trying to figure out how to fight Ogre. Callie replied negatively, realizing that they might not even get the chance to fight Ogre. Kijo urged them to stop entertaining such thoughts, emphasizing that fighting someone like Ogre would result in certain defeat. Torres agreed and pointed out that Ogre was not merely looking to win the fight but to kill his opponents. Aegis wild boars, Torres never gives up. He knocks down his opponent after giving his best on the last match that day. He knows that the next day he will fight there, but then someone asks him if he likes boys, and he replied that he certainly does not. Then, Azalea asks if she was calling just to ask that simple question. She replied that usually, boys can't talk when they see her face, so she asked him because he seemed too calm. She asked if he wasn't nervous. Then she told him that she heard many fighters died on the first day of the match, and maybe she wouldn't see him again starting tomorrow. He told her he was not a noble like her, so he had nothing to lose. She told him he was pretty good at talking, maybe because he was a fighter. She asked him if that's why he was good at talking. She tossed an apple toward him, saying that if he wins tomorrow, she'll dedicate herself to him as his victory. He confidently told her not to worry because he'll win. The next day, people hit the drum, indicating the event was starting. The audience on the stage screamed in excitement. He was glad that it was finally starting, while Nixar noticed that his body had changed so much. His back and shoulder muscles were getting bigger than before. Then the host began to introduce the veteran fighter with 21 wins in Vataman training camp, the Iron Wall, Caesar. The host told everyone that Caesar's opponent looked like a dwarf, but the rookie had already won one fight against an experienced fighter, Callie, the next fighter from Aegis training camp. The audience angrily asked if they thought they came all the way there to see a terrible fight, and if Callie was eating properly because he looked like someone from a poor family. On the other hand, Azalea wished for Callie to win the fight, but suddenly, someone behind her told her that the result was too obvious. A nobleman told her that fighter Caesar was gaining recognition these days, and maybe Caesar would become the champion in the future. She knew she had nothing to do there, which is why she hated coming there. But she smilingly told the man that she thought the boy from their side would win. Still, the man confidently told her that physics is absolute in boxing. He didn't know if he ever told her, but in the past, he also had to fight someone. She smiled in response but wondered why that pathetic man was bragging. She told the man they should make a bet, and her bet was on Callie. She told the man that if Callie loses, she'll spend time with him tomorrow. This made the man light up in surprise and agree. Then the man asked her what she wanted to do if he lost. She replied that she saw a nice ruby necklace at the craft shop she went to yesterday. The man replied okay and told her that it was an interesting bet. This made him wonder why it was so easy and if she thought he was interested in her, and she knew that she was making a bet that he certainly would lose. Caesar told Callie that he'd win easily this time and blamed his master for putting him in that match. But Callie just sighed in frustration about Caesar and the other man he fought before. Then, he asked Caesar if they fight with their mouths and confidently told him to bring it on. Caesar furiously ran toward him and tried to punch him, but he avoided it as he expected. He knew that Caesar had iron-like muscles and thick skin, so he wouldn't go down easily if he hit his jaw. Caesar punched him with his other hand, but he ducked in time and jumped backward to create a space between them. Caesar told him that he must be good at dodging, and then Caesar inhaled, thinking that he'd make sure Callie couldn't dodge anymore. He was surprised when Caesar speedily and continuously attacked him using his two fists. The man told Azalea that it ended like that, and their bet was done. But then the other noble guy shouted in surprise, and the audience was shocked too to see Callie speedily avoiding Caesar's fast attack. The man was shocked and wondered what the hell was happening. Caesar thought it was impossible, and the nobleman was surprised to hear people asking if Callie was the fighter who knocked down Dorman's fighter, and said that they heard Callie won with his eyes closed. The man asked if it was true, but Azalea just looked at Callie, smiling and humming. On the other hand, Callie was busy fighting while wondering if he could knock Caesar down in one shot, if he had to stack up the damage and break Caesar's muscles, and if his stamina would last until then. Then he noticed Caesar's back and liver. Caesar tiredly called him a brat, but he kept silent, knowing he couldn't miss that chance. Then he jumped towards Caesar and punched him in the liver. He was surprised to feel it, and he knew it went in. Nixar stood up in shock to witness it because he knew that the punch Callie threw in the middle of an explosive dash was a perfect weight shift. Nixar thought it seemed like Callie had reaped the fruits of his constant muscle training because Callie did something he couldn't even dream of with his original weak body. But it was not an attack based on the opponent's movement and weight utilization. It was a punch delivered with Callie's pure strength. Caesar's body shook in pain, but before Caesar could attack again, Callie punched him in the jaw, making Nixar smile and telling Callie in his mind that he has grown. The audience started to cheer for Callie, telling him to keep pushing and that he was not bad for a little one. Then the nobleman next to Azalea stood in disbelief. Callie felt hurt in his hand and noticed that the thick muscle armor on Caesar's body was breaking apart. Caesar shook in anger and shouted, launching his fist at him. But he speedily dodged it and went behind Caesar, then punched his back, making Caesar clench his teeth in pain. Caesar thought it was not a normal punch because it was a spear that pierced through everything, a sharp spear. Then Callie speedily went in front of Caesar and punched him in the face, making Azalea and Nixar proud. He was thinking that there, he had recreated his life. Then he gave his last punch on Caesar's face, making Caesar bleed and collapse, then fall to the ground. He caught his breath, then raised his hand as a victory, making the audience cheer for him. The nobleman shouted that it was impossible, but Azalea just told the man that she won after all, and she is looking forward to the necklace, making the man walk away in shyness, thinking that if only Caesar fought more decently, it would have been less humiliating for him. Suddenly, Gadolf appeared behind her and shouted that Callie was his boxer. He raised Callie with care, but then Gadolf noticed Callie facing them and punched his chest with his fist as a sign of respect, then raised his hand in front of them. Gadolf thought Callie was dedicating it to him, and Callie knows how to be grateful. But the truth is, Azalea knows it was for her, and Callie was telling her that he did it. The audience loudly cheered for him while he thought that he had become stronger. A moment later, Nixar told him that it was a good match and the public, as well as the nobles, must have been impressed by his game. To which he thanked Nixar. But then he felt pain in his hand, so Nixar unwrapped the bandage on his hand, showing his injured fist, and told him to soak it in water. He immediately soaked it while Nixar told him that, as he expected, he still has a long way to go. He didn't even know it hurt and thinks if he had pushed himself a little more, he would have damaged his bones. Torres told him that his fragile body was still the same. But he did well, and he thought he only used his head. Then Kijo shatteringly told him that he won and he was going to win too. Torres told Kijo to stop shaking because he was shaking his chair too. Nixar told Kijo to breathe deeply and asked him if he wanted to go out and not be able to punch. Kijo replied that the crowd's noise was ringing in his ears, and he was out of breath and suffocated, making him go crazy. He noticed that Kijo looked like he was having a panic attack. But he was not surprised to see it on someone as fragile as Kijo. He told Kijo not to think too deeply and just back off and hit with his long arms like he did in the last match. Kijo asked him if it was possible, but a moment later, Kijo proudly shouted that he won and he damn well won too. Torres said it was annoying, but he just laughed while they both looked at celebrating Kijo on the stage. Kijo thanked him because he did what he said and won, to which he agreed. Kijo shouted that he was so strong and he must be the best. But Callie knew that it was a desperate measure, but guessed that maybe Kijo had some talent. Later, Azalea happily told him that he should see that man's face because the man's face turned red, and his hands were trembling. He asked her what she would have done if he had lost, but she just asked him back if he didn't boast that he would win and told him that thanks to it, he can even perform his role as her bodyguard. He told her that it was true, but she has a really big heart, and she told him that she'll take it as a compliment. Then she came out all dressed and told him that they should go, but then Gadolf ran toward her and told her that a guest had come looking for her. She asked her father who it was that he was making such a fuss, and Gadolf replied that he is the second son of Count Joseph, making her realize something and wonder if it could be that man. A few minutes later, the man told Azalea that she was one of the potential fiancés chosen by Aegis Manor for him. He found the beautiful red-haired girl, and the clue was quickly found. Then the man introduced himself to her formally as Wylan Joseph, the second son of Count Joseph. She knows that Wylan knows that she was a girl from a powerless baron family, and Wylan is getting cocky. The Joseph family is a prestigious family with considerable influence in central politics, and she knows that her father must be happy to find a grooming candidate. But she was upset, thinking that her father is acting like a greedy person. Then Wylan gives the ruby necklace he promised to her and tells her that, as she said, the craftsmanship is good, and it suits her red hair well. She takes it feeling embarrassed, but she still thanks Wylan and tells him that he is an honorable person who keeps his promise. Then she told him that she'll be going now, but Wylan told her that although he lost the bet, he wanted to ask her if she would give him the honor of walking with him if she didn't mind. She wanted to run away before Wylan said it, but her father noticed her being silent. So Gadolf grabbed her hand and told her that she looked like she was too embarrassed to speak. Then he told Wylan that they'll prepare right away, to which Wylan agreed and told him to take their time. Inside the mansion, Gadolf shouted and asked Azalea what she was talking about, but she just told her father that she has no intention of spending time with that person. Gadolf told her to wait for a minute and asked her if she wouldn't spend some time with Wylan just once for her father's sake. Gadolf also told her that she might find some good aspects of Wylan, and he wanted her to live in a better place than August's territory. She looked at her father and told him that just once, but she wouldn't see Wylan again if he came back. Then Gadolf talks to Azalea's maids, making Callie, who witnessed everything, think Gadolf is a pathetic gentleman. He knows that Gadolf runs a training center without knowing much about boxing and only cares about immediate benefits. Also, Gadolf had sold off the apprentices who were the assets of his estate but somehow didn't go bankrupt. Suddenly, someone told him that, sure enough, that boy boxer was from there, and Wylan told him that no wonder Azalea was so confident when she bet, making him surprised. But then Wylan told him that he felt dirty looking at him and asked if they too conspired to rip him off. Then, he called him a slave bastard with a filthy face and slightly slapped his face, telling him that he better know that he was lucky that time and he'll fall to the ground of the arena soon. Then Wylan walks past him and asks Azalea if they should go, making him peek back in anger. A moment later, Azalea and Wylan were by the lake, chatting, while Callie was lying on the side, wondering if it was okay to leave Azalea alone with the creepy, split-personality kid. Then he looked at the sky and noticed that the weather was nice. Slowly, he fell asleep and dreamt of someone shouting for him to sit down while being hit by someone. Then he hit back the man, and the man fell to the stage while he was thinking of just hitting and beating them, knowing that there was no one who could stand after taking his fist. But it was just his arrogant thoughts. He lived by resorting to violence, hoping for some compensation for his broken fist, and if he could go back, he would never do it again. Suddenly, he woke up and sat up in shock, wondering if it was a dream. He knew that he got a second chance, but if he had gone back to the past, he wouldn't have lived so arrogantly and dirtily. Suddenly, a maid ran toward him in panic and told him that something was wrong. On the other hand, Azalea asked Wylan what he was doing, and he replied that she was spoiled, then asked her if she knew how much that ruby necklace was worth. Then he shouted at her, telling her that if she got it, she had to pay with her body. She angrily told him not to make her laugh because it was an item they bet on and called Wylan a brat. Then she kicked Wylan in his private area, making Wylan clench his teeth in anger and pain. Then he slapped Azalea in the face. Callie, who saw it, was surprised and quickly ran toward them in anger, calling Wylan a nasty name. But Wylan's men stopped him and told him that he couldn't let him get to their lord, calling him a half-baked rookie boxer. But he seriously told them to let him pass now and he'll let them be. Still, one of the men told him that martial arts that only use fists are useless in real combat, and the other man teased him to come at them. Suddenly, he quickly punched the man in front in the face, then he grabbed the man's finger and snapped it, making the man scream in pain, and the others were shocked in horror. One of the three men ran away, shouting that he'd call the guard, and told his comrade to hold Callie back, making the two men surprised. He angrily told them next, making them shake in fear. On the other hand, Azalea shouted at Wylan to let her go and asked him if he wasn't ashamed of doing it. But Wylan just told her not to dare talk back to him and that she should just stay still. She tried to free herself, making Wylan tell her not to resist. But suddenly, Callie appeared and kicked Wylan in the face, sending him flying and crashing to the ground hard. Wylan asked him how he got there but received an angry glare and a question from Callie about what he was doing. Wylan angrily replied that he was trying to get compensation for the ruby necklace. Callie angrily asked him what he meant by compensation and remembered his past self. Wylan angrily asked him what his problem was and called him a derogatory name. But Callie just punched Wylan's face, grabbed his hair, and punched him again. Then he furiously slammed Wylan's face into the river, lifted him up, and asked if he was sober. Later, the news that the second son of the Joseph family was hit by a slave quickly spread among the nobles who had gathered for the harvest festival. Wylan angrily walked, thinking that if they didn't want their family to be ridiculed, they must execute that slave and make sure the Aegis family could never enter politics or hold power from now on. Gadolf slammed his hand on the table in anger and asked how he should handle the situation. He thought things were going well, but now the Joseph family was their enemy. He was even angrier when he asked how dare Wylan Joseph touch his daughter. Nixar told him that Callie was detained at the guardhouse as a suspect, and there was no way to get Callie out. Gadolf asked Nixar what he was talking about, getting Callie out, and told Nixar to just think of Callie as dead. Gadolf told Nixar that he appreciated that Callie had saved his daughter, but if they took Callie's side, their family would be ruined too, and Nixar agreed, knowing that it was the life of a slave. Suddenly, the door opened and Azalea called her father. Gadolf asked her what was wrong and told her that she should rest more, but she begged her father to defend Callie because Callie had saved her twice, and even though Callie was a slave, he deserved justice. She also told her father that even a dumb beast gets treated well if it saves its master. Gadolf told her that he'd handle the matter himself and called Nixar to make her leave, but she still told her father that she knew what he'd do and that he was going to abandon Callie. Nixar told her that her father had no other choice, which made him shake in anger while thinking about Callie. Meanwhile, in Wesley Guardhouse, another prisoner asked Callie if he had beaten up a noble and told him that it was amazing, and he was their hero. Callie asked the man why he was in there, and the man replied that he was a pickpocket. He told the man that he was pathetic, but the man coughingly told him that he would probably lose his hand, but he'd lose his head. The guard told the man to be quiet, but the man just laughed. Callie was frustrated, thinking that he had given up the chance to box again. But he knew that if he hadn't saved Azalea, he would have regretted it for the rest of his life. Later, in court, the judge called him the slave of the Aegis family to ask if he admitted to assaulting Wylan Joseph and told him that the victim, Wylan Joseph, and 4 other witnesses were testifying against his crime. He replied that he admitted it, and people in the court began to throw trash at him, shouting to cut off his head, hang it on the city gate, tear off his limbs, and make him pay for his crime, and that he should die. But he just thought they were trashy individuals and asked them in his head if it meant it was okay for Wylan to harm Azalea. The judge told everyone that the court would sentence the slave Callie to death, and if they had any objections, they should speak now. Suddenly, Wesley told the judge to wait and asked if he could say a few words before the verdict. Then he told the judge that Callie, the slave, had committed a serious crime. But it was the Harvest Festival, a time to show mercy even to beggars. Wesley made it clear that he was not trying to claim innocence, and they should make Callie die like a slave. However, there was a slave named Ogre from Dorman, who had been executed several times. Dorman agreed with what Wesley said. Wesley told everyone that they were holding a match between the condemned and Ogre for the entertainment of the people, a match between a rookie boxer and Ogre, which was close to execution. Dorman laughingly agreed. Wesley explained that a slave is also a boxer, so dying in a fight is mercy, and on the last day, he wanted to have a match between the slave Callie and Ogre. Callie was surprised, but Wesley said it would continue if Count Joseph agreed. Joseph was silent for a moment and told Wesley to do as he pleased. Wesley realized that neither he nor Joseph wanted to satisfy each other's grievances, but he thought it was the best compromise. Wesley also thought the movements of that young boxer were artistic, and if it weren't for that problem, he would have bought Callie even if he had to pay money. The judge told everyone that on the last day of the Harvest Festival, he would replace the execution with a match between Dorman's Ogre and Callie. Then the nobles began to walk away, but someone told him that he was dead now and called him a slave bastard. Then Joseph spit on his face, making him surprised, and Wylan walked away, laughing. He wiped the saliva from his face, thinking that if there is a god who brought him there, that god must want to see him pushed to the cliff and climbing up endlessly. So he planned to struggle as much as he could, survive until the end, and reach the peak with his 2 fists. A moment later, the guard explained to him that he was in the waiting room and asked him if he got like that while protecting the lady, then told him that was some loyalty and he'd cheer for him. The guard closed the room door, leaving him in the dark alone. But then he heard the guard telling someone that visiting was impossible. However, the man told the guard that just a moment would do, leaving the guard confused. Then Kijo, who was Tiri, Torres, and Nixar walked inside. He asked Kijo if he was okay, but then Kijo started to cry while thanking him for helping him last time and was furious, knowing that he hit the guy who deserved it. Torres told him that at first, he hated him for being a whiner, but he realized he was a good guy and shouldn't die. Nixar gave him a bowl of food, telling him that he had to eat it to have the strength to fight, and he could see for himself that Ogre was more than a monster. He also mentioned that the only good thing is that Ogre can't use skills. Then Nixar turned to him and wished him good luck. When they left, he laughed, thinking that he had people who would be sad if he died, which was enough for him. But then a lady walked into the room, and when he saw who it was, he was surprised. He asked Azalea what she was doing there, and she replied that she was not the kind of person who ignores her benefactor. He told her that before she worried about him, she should take care of her modesty first because she got kidnapped by bandits and caught by some jerk. She told him that if he was so worried, then he could protect her from now on. Then she reached for his neck, got closer to him, and kissed him on the lips, making him surprised. He asked her what she was doing, but she shouted that she didn't know. Then her tears dropped on the ground while telling him to promise her like he did last time and just promise her that he'll win. He told her that she makes it hard for him to die, even if he wanted to, and that he'll stay by her side until she grows up more. Meanwhile, Dorman told Ogre that it was time to fight, and it was an execution, so there was no rope, and he could go wild and kill Callie as cruelly as possible. Ogre threw the meat on the ground and set his foot on the stage while the host shouted that finally, the highlight of that harvest festival, the executioner of Dorman's ogre. The host called the condemned, Callie, onto the stage, and the people began to shout to tear Callie apart and show the criminals what they deserved. Hearing the people, Ogre clenched his teeth in anger and screamed loudly. However, Callie was just frustrated that they were noisy while being free and faced Ogre, noticing that Ogre was incredibly large. Callie tore his shirt off, wrapped it around his fist, and knew that with Ogre's physique, he wouldn't need skills. He positioned his fist forward, back his feet to the side, launched his fist, and hit Ogre's side. But Ogre just looked at him and punched him, making Callie surprised that Ogre didn't even feel that he hit him. He created distance, avoiding Ogre's attack, but the sand flew in the air because of the attack, making him wonder about the incredible power in Ogre's muscles. Ogre held his side and told him that he would die, but he just told Ogre that God is fair because God gave him a blessed body and took away his intelligence. He knew that weight class was absolute, but humans use their brains to compensate for their disadvantages and create skills, so they were a tribe with tough bones, used to fighting against opponents stronger than themselves. He began to walk toward Ogre, who was looking at him. The people were confused to see it and asked if Callie had lost his mind, thinking he was crazy. Torres and Kijo were shocked too, and Dorman teasingly asked him if he was giving up on the match, telling him that he was going to die on his own feet. However, Callie continued to stare at Ogre, who was staring back at him. Then Ogre attacked him, but he speedily avoided it and continued dodging Ogre's punches. He planned to swing continuously, knowing that he got hit because he was slow and he'd get hit even if he was a little late, as Ogre still had super speed attacks despite his size, making him think that Ogre was indeed a monster. Wesley, who was watching, thought it was a shame, a waste of Callie's courage and skill. He realized that Callie was not an ordinary person and guessed that maybe this could bring about a new revolution in boxing. He saw that rather than Callie delivering a final blow, Callie continued to accumulate damage. Ogre tried to punch him, but he continued avoiding it at a speed that made Ogre furiously call him a little rat while attacking. Callie told Ogre in his mind to go wild and get excited because he knew that it became easier to avoid. Then he punched Ogre's side once again, making the other people cheer for him and the others stunned in surprise. Wesley understood that this was the next level in boxing right now and considered it a revolution in the sport. Ogre launched his huge fist, telling him to just run away, but Callie saw that Ogre's side was open again. So he speedily launched toward it, avoiding Ogre's attack, and powerfully punched Ogre's side with his fist, making Ogre scream in pain and step back, shaking. Callie was thinking that even though currently Bikwana skill striking with the blade of a tightly clenched fist is not in boxing, and although it has strong destructive power, it has the disadvantage of being easy to predict its trajectory. However, if his opponent is stupid, it will work best. Dorman shouted that it couldn't be happening and that no one could defeat his ogre. Kijo and Torres stood up in shock on the side. But Torres thought that Callie was always like this, twisting everyone's hope, a guy who creates variables like eating. Torres elbowed Kijo, telling him to cheer up because Callie might win at that rate. Callie's great ogre strategy was not to use snapping blows to the brain and neck like usual. The bigger the body, the bigger the effect, and the muscles accumulated more quickly. Lack of oxygen in the blood is a common symptom of its effect, however, it was Callie's misjudgment. He was shocked that the crazy monster ogre was still moving. He knew he aimed to exhaust Ogre, but he was exhausted instead. Ogre punched him, and he realized the danger. He immediately bent his body down to avoid it, but then he couldn't breathe anymore, and Ogre launched his fist toward him. A loud punch sound reverberated everywhere, and he was thrown away hard into the distance. He tried to stand up, his arms and hands shaking, and managed to do so. He knew that if he hadn't pulled back before being hit, his arm would have been shattered. Ogre furiously glared at him, but then Ogre fell dizzy and his vision became blurry, making Callie confused. Ogre held his head in pain and struggled to catch his breath. Callie noticed it and realized that it was the first time it had happened. He knew that the reason they had been playing for so long was that they had never moved too vigorously, always finishing it in one go. That applied to Ogre too, as, after all, they were all humans. He thinks the Ogre's time is up, and it might be his last chance. So, he immediately runs toward the Ogre, knowing that the Ogre is exhausted. He ducks the Ogre's punch and launches forward, thinking that he's going to risk everything there. Then he hits the Ogre's chest, making the Ogre scream in pain and cough out saliva. However, he felt his wrist dislocated. Still, he noticed that the ogre's guard was down, so he thought it was his chance and launched his fist once again while telling the ogre to bite down hard on his teeth. Then he powerfully punches the ogre's face. The ogre tries to attack back, but he jumps in time to avoid it and then punches the ogre's neck. He feels his hand's bone break, but he still raises his hand, thinking that he should do it one more time, and hits the ogre's neck hard, making the ogre growl in pain, and his mouth bubbles. Then the ogre kneels on the ground and collapses face first. The people are silent and ask how the ogre collapsed, but Kijo and Torres cheer for him. He knows that if the ogre had used proper boxing, he would have had no way of winning, and curses Baron Dorman, who didn't teach him how to manage his stamina. But then the ogre's hand moves, shocking Torres and him to see the ogre standing up in front of him. Suddenly, the ogre jumps toward him to attack, causing him to cuss in surprise and frustration. Then the ogre kicks him in the stomach, making him cough up blood and thrown away. He slams into the ground hard, and something cracks behind him, making the people shout that it's a foul. He stands up, feeling so much pain. Then the ogre immediately runs toward him and kicks him, thinking that the ogre is still moving. He holds his stomach in pain, but then the ogre launches his huge fist toward him and hits him, sending him flying. The ogre clenches his teeth in anger and steps on his one foot, making him wince in pain. Then the ogre presses his foot on his foot hard, breaking his bone and making him scream in pain. But the ogre just smiles at him and grabs him by the neck. The ogre lifts him up, and his foot is shaking in pain, wondering if it's still boxing. He slowly couldn't breathe, but then the ogre hugged him with his 2 arms and squeezed him, making him scream in pain. He called the ogre a son of a jerk and told him to see what he'd do. He then grabbed the ogre's hair and bit his ear, making the ogre let him go in pain and hold his ear. He fell to the ground, but he just shakily spit out the ogre's ear and stood up, while the people shouted that Callie ripped off the ogre's ear and that Callie is so barbaric. He teasingly told the ogre that his blood is not green like other orcs, and it was still red, while holding sand in his hand. The ogre glared at him in anger and jumped forward to attack him while shouting at him that he would kill him. He slammed his body into the corner of the stage and threw sand into the ogre's eyes when he was near him. The ogre closed his eyes in pain, and he admitted that the ogre was strong. He punched the ogre's knee, making the ogre kneel on the ground, but he still tried to punch him, to which he blocked with his arm. He thought that even though his bones were creaking and his stomach got twisted, he didn't feel hurt. He grabbed the ogre's hair and launched his knee toward the ogre's face, then hit the ogre hard, making the ogre's nose bleed and break a few teeth. Wesley knew that it was not a battle between a beast and a man because it was a battle of a beast and the best. Suddenly, someone told Callie to win it, and the people began to cheer for Callie continuously while he was busy attacking the ogre on the stage. He powerfully punched the ogre's face, pulled his hand back, and punched the ogre's jaw, making the ogre slide back and slowly fall. He told the ogre that he wins and collapsed. He caught his breath for a moment while looking at the ogre, who passed out on the stage and shakily raised his hand in victory, making the people cheer happily for him. Joseph was furious to see Callie win, and Dorman was in shock to see his ogre defeated, but Torres and Kijo were happily calling his name. He slowly walked, but then he heard people walking behind him, and the soldiers told him not to move because they would continue his execution. He noticed that it was the soldiers from Joseph, making him laugh and think that it was the end for him. But then a stone flew toward the stage and hit one of the soldiers. The people started booing and furiously asked the soldiers what they were doing. The people shouted to leave Callie alone, give Callie mercy, and they were cowards. The soldiers sadly bowed their heads and fearfully told everyone that they also wanted to do it, making Joseph angry and asking his soldiers what they were doing. Wesley told Joseph to let Callie live because the Harvest Festival is a festival to win public sentiment, and now the public is giving Callie sympathy. If he kills Callie, that Harvest Festival will be meaningless. Wesley also told Joseph that he thinks he will understand his decision, making Joseph pissed, thinking that he can't cause political trouble with the Duke of Wesley. Joseph ordered his son Wyland to stand up because they should go, while thinking that he can't forgive Aegis for making his family a laughing stock. So, he swore he'd destroy them so they can't rise back. Wyland furiously glared at Callie in anger. The host shouted that Callie won versus the ogre. Later, the doctor told Callie that it was a miracle he was still alive and that he fought with his body, so he could only say he had strong willpower. Nixar told Callie that he must survive, but the doctor told Nixar that he needed to pay more for the hospital treatment, making Nixar curse Gadolf and think that even if Gadolf's afraid of Joseph, he shouldn't refuse to pay for the medical bills. Suddenly, someone told Nixar to pay for it, and then Azalea took off her earring and showed it to the doctor while asking if it was enough. The doctor looked at the crystal earring and told them that he'll do his best, making Nixar think that the doctor is terrible. Suddenly, Callie coughed out blood and weakly asked Azalea how it went. She replied that the death sentence was rejected and the people didn't want him to die. Also, it was a victory that he earned himself, and she was glad he survived. He sighed, thinking that at least he was alive. A week later, he was lying on a cart full of wheat. Suddenly, Kijo teasingly asked who he was and told him that he was the hero of that harvest festival called Ogre Slayer, Kali. He was surprised to hear it and asked Kijo who came up with such a cheesy nickname. Kijo replied that it was what everyone was calling him. And Torres told him that he was lucky to be carried around. Then Torres teasingly told him that he was jealous, but he just told them to shut up because he almost died. He was told that the bones of his arm and fist would heal well, and the ligament was stretched, but it was expected. The problem is his shin bone that the ogre smashed into pieces. He looks at Gadolf, thinking that Nixar and Azalea persuaded them not to kick him out, but then Gadolf turns around angrily to leave, making him realize that he won't get any good treatment. The way to Wesley was rough, but the way back was smooth. Kali and his companions arrived at the August estate and relaxed. 3 months passed, and winter came. Gadolf furiously slammed his hand on the wall and angrily shouted that he had waited for 3 months. Then he told Nixar to say something and asked Kali why he still liked it while he was dragging one of his feet. Gadolf shouted, asking if Kali's leg would fully recover and that he heard the bone was misaligned. Nixar knew that Kali's bone overlapped with the growth period. Moreover, the bone was already shattered, so Kali won't be able to avoid being a cripple. Gadolf ordered Kali to tell him himself if it is true, and he replied that it is true that his leg won't heal properly, making Gadolf shocked and furiously shout that it is over and ask what is the point of being famous as an ogre slayer when he can't even use it. Also, it was winter and the snow was only falling on their estate, so they were running out of firewood and grain. Then Gadolf told Kali that it was all his fault because he provoked the Joseph family, so it happened, and he should have died at the hands of the ogre, making Kali silent. Nixar knew he had to stop Gadolf from killing or expelling Kali, so he told Gadolf that being a boxer might be difficult, but with Kali's skills, he could still contribute as an instructor. However, he told Nixar that he wouldn't be an instructor. Later, Kijo asked him if he was crazy and if he was really rejecting the instructor's position. He told Kijo to shut up because it was his choice. But Kijo called him an idiot and told him that the best position a retired boxer could have is an instructor. Kijo asked if he thought Nixar recommended him for nothing, mentioning that Nixar saw potential in him and gave him a chance. He just kept quiet, remembering Nixar telling him that he wouldn't recover by summer and that he was done with him. Nixar also admitted he didn't know how to heal a broken leg, and if he had known, he wouldn't have retired so soon. Kijo asked him if he hit his head wrong when he fought the ogre and said there must be something wrong with his brain. He told Kijo to stop talking nonsense and take care of himself. Kijo mentioned that he had 7 wins, and Torres asked if he really hit his head wrong, like Kijo said, and said that he made their master Gadolf angry. He replied that Gadolf hated him no matter what he did, so why would he bother being polite? He also told them that they were the ones who abandoned him first. Torres and Kijo laughed and told him that he had some guts. While he was lying in bed for 3 months, Kijo and Torres had already fought several times and made names for themselves. He knew that being an instructor would be a stable job, but it didn't mean anything if he didn't fight himself. A moment later, the man thanked him and told him that he wouldn't have to sleep in the cold that night. He told the man that he didn't need to thank him because he wanted to do it. The man told him that now he saw him properly. He seemed to have become taller and his body had grown bigger. He told the man that it might be because he had cut down a lot of trees. One of the men told him that if only his leg wasn't hurt, he could fight. But then the other man softly elbowed his friend and told him that he was clueless. The man realized it, but Kali told the man that it was okay because it would get better soon. Then he turned around to leave, telling them that it was cold, so they should go inside. When he was alone inside the slave room, he slammed his hand on the gate in anger but told himself to calm down because he had more knowledge and experience than other boxers, and he already knew that the medical techniques there couldn't fix his leg. Suddenly, Azalea appeared and asked him why he was hitting the gate like that, but he just asked her what brought her to his room. She replied that he was talking like she was somewhere she shouldn't be, making him frustrated because he couldn't even look Azalea in the eyes after what happened last time. She smiled seeing his reaction and told him that she came there to say goodbye, which made him surprised. He asked her if she was going somewhere far, and she replied that their estate is very poor now, and the trading has stopped due to pressure from the Joseph family, so the only merchants left are the occasional helpers. The days keep getting colder and prices in the estate are skyrocketing. Also, there is a shortage of not only luxuries but also daily necessities, and if things continue like that, they won't be able to survive the winter. He had heard that things were difficult in the estate, but he never thought it would be that bad. He asked her what she was going to do. She replied that if they don't get the daily necessities, they will have to make them themselves, and she'll lead the way herself. He asked her if her father was going with her, but she replied that it was impossible because Gadolf is like a half-dead person, and Gadolf is scared of Joseph, so he stays locked in his room. She told him that it is a shame to be harmed by those guys, and she learns it smartly that without power, justice and everything else is useless, making him realize that she is all grown up. She also told him that if something happens to their family and if she had the power, she could make a difference. Then she noticed his legs. He told her that it was his choice and he was prepared. She told him that she heard that there were people who were so skilled in medicine that they could even bring the dead back to life, and if he leads the upper class, he would be able to hear more rumors and connections. She swore to him that she'll definitely heal his leg, but he told her not to mind it because there is no need to help a slave like him. She grabbed his shoulder and reminded him that he saved her twice, and that reason was enough. Later, he silently looked at her walking away, thinking that now, even a girl who was barely 20 was stepping forward, so he knew that he shouldn't hesitate, and he clenched his hand in confidence. A few days later, someone asked him if he said he was a boxer, and he replied that he came there for rehabilitation training. The men told him that it would be nice if the labor force was increased and asked him if it could be rehabilitation through logging. He knew that it was virtually impossible to box with the condition of his legs right now because he couldn't use the reaction of kicking his legs, but he had to do it. Otherwise, there was no point in running all the way there. He was confused when his hit didn't even move the tree he was hitting, making the man laugh and tell him that it was not how he used an axe, and he should give it to him. Then the man swung the axe with force and hit the tree, making a loud sound and breaking the tree. He was amazed to see it, and the man told him that strength is not the key because strength is only used for a moment, helping him understand. Minutes later, logs were organized on the ground, and he was busy cutting the logs into small pieces. He noticed that it was very irritating for his back and waist. Suddenly, a man panicked, telling them that they should go down, with one of the men asking what he was talking about when there was still time to go down. A minute later, the man told the others that he saw a bear's footprints and thought it must have come down in search of prey. The man also told them that, looking at the size of the footprints, it looked like a young bear that lost its mother, but still, they should better be careful and just finish what they were doing and leave. The man's friend asked the man who that boy over there with an injured leg was, while pointing at Callie, and told the man that he was seeing Callie for the first time there. The man replied that Callie was a boxer slave at the training center, and he must have heard about Callie, the guy who fought the ogre at the harvest festival. The man happily approached Callie while telling him that he is the ogre slayer, and his son went to see that game, making Callie surprised. The man told the other that Callie is that ogre slayer, so he can catch the bear. But the man told his friend that if they encountered a bear, they should run away while Callie was in the center, shaking, and begging them in his mind to stop with that weird nickname they gave him. Later, in Callie's room, he asked someone if they wanted him to teach them some techniques and what was wrong with the famous wild boar from Aegis. Torres replied that he was ashamed, but he admitted that his technique was really good, so he shouldn't rest now. Torres grabbed the cup of water on the table, but his hand slipped and it fell on the floor, making him ask Torres what happened. Torres replied that sometimes his body doesn't listen to what he wants it to do, and it's like suddenly he can't see well or stumbles, which surprises him. Then he throws a stone at Torres while telling him to catch it. Torres tried to catch it but missed, making him wonder if it was retinal detachment, punch drunk, or if he got the effect after getting hit so hard continuously. He knows that Torres is the type that can hit a lot, but Torres also gets hit a lot. He tells Torres that if he gets hit hard on the head anymore, he'll be crippled. And Torres tells him that was the reason why he came to him and entreats him to teach him some of his techniques. Then he bent down and positioned himself, making Torres ask him what it was. He replied that it was a defensive position, and he could increase his defense by sticking his arms and body together because right now, he had a dull sense of distance. So it was a better option than trying to dodge every attack. Torres copied his position and told him that in that position, it would be hard to attack because of the narrow view. He explained to Torres that straight attacks are easy to defend against in that posture, but as for attacks from the side, he still needs to move his head and body. He also tells Torres that when his opponents attack him, he should move his upper body to accelerate, and the important thing is not to just hit but to block and hit. Then he silently thinks for a moment and tells Torres that right now, it seems like his brain or his eyes are having a problem, so he suggests to him to take a break. Torres tells him not to make him laugh and asks him if he knows how tight his schedule was. Torres also tells him that some other guys are trying to mess with them and asks him if he wants them to fail just because he is sick right now. He tried to explain his words, but he just asked Torres what Nixar is trying to do, if Nixar is trying to stop Gadolf from going wild, and why Nixar has such a busy schedule. Torres asks him back if he hasn't heard what Nixar said about the busy schedule, and tells him that he is the only one in the right mind now, but it seems he is going to lose his mind soon. He tells Torres that if it was so, let alone that Pigsty Training Center, the estate may be ruined too. He knows that currently, the management of the estate is at its worst, and Gadolf's reputation is actually not that good, so the dissatisfaction of the citizens increases. One of the men in the snow tells his friend that the winter is really cold, and he heard Mr. and Mrs. Doran ran away last night. The man's friend replied that the Dorans are engineers, so they can go anywhere, but not them, they can only stay and get buried there. The man asked his friend where the guy with leg injuries went, and the man's friend replied that Callie completed his quota earlier, so he went to train nearby. The man couldn't believe that Callie fulfilled his quota already and told his friend that Callie was faster than him. The man's friend told the man that Callie wouldn't have gone that far, so they should call him after they were done. On the other hand, somewhere nearby, he was exhaling and punching the tree hard with his bare fist. Then he punched it again with his other fist, and he continued punching it while thinking that it was an ignorant way. But it was effective, and it was called Wolf's Claw. He knows that when the bones receive impact, the calcium content increases, and so does the bone density. In other words, if it receives enough impact to recover and is trained to the extreme, the bones will become harder and the skeleton will become like a weapon, which was the final result he wanted. He thinks he should become stronger than before because he trained his back and his waist, and that he must become stronger. A moment later, someone called him and told him that they should go now. He grabbed his coat from the tree and replied that he'd be there. Suddenly, he heard someone shouting in panic, so he immediately ran toward them, and he saw a man on the ground pointing at something in fear. He looked up and was surprised to see a dead wolf on the ground. One of the men shouted that it was dead, and the man shyly told them that he was surprised for no reason. The man's friend told them that it was so pitiful because it seems like it got hurt by the wild bear, and it looks like it was trying to protect its baby before it died. The man agreed, saying that it was so unfortunate for them, and it must be hard for the little wolves now because the weather is like this, and it's even hard for humans to get food in that situation. One of the little wolves barked at him and whimperingly leaned on his feet. The man asked him if he wanted to look after that guy because it seemed to like him and told him to take it before it changes its mind. He told it that it was desperate too, and they should try to take it. A moment later, Kijo played with it while saying that it was so cute and told him that he knew that if Nixar knew about it, he would be in big trouble. He told Kijo that he'd give it food from his own portion, and it was not like he was wasting his meal, without noticing Nixar standing in front of their door. But then they noticed Nixar when he walked inside. Nixar angrily told him that it seems the food he gave him really made him full and asked him how he could try to adopt a wolf and if he is really a free citizen, to which he apologized while holding the wolf. Nixar grabbed the wolf in his hand while shouting that he'd take it out. But then Nixar saw the sad face of the wolf, and Nixar froze on his words when he saw it, making Kijo and Callie look at each other. Then he grabbed the wolf in Nixar's hand while saying that he'll throw it. But Nixar told him to wait and that he thinks it is okay to have one, and it doesn't look like a bad puppy at all. He and Kijo put their fists together in victory while Kijo told Nixar that it is not a dog, but a wolf, but Nixar replied that he doesn't care and ordered them to just train it well so it doesn't bite people. Nixar also told them to go to bed and told him that he has to help build the mansion tomorrow. He asked Nixar if he said before that he was going to destroy the mansion and told Nixar that it was amazing. Nixar replied that once they decided it, they really go all out about it, but the problem is that they always go the wrong way. Then Nixar remembered Gadolf drinking wine while laughing and shouting that they will succeed. Gadolf, who was spending his days drunk, had a good idea one day. He thought of inviting nobles and merchants to a boxing match, which had become increasingly popular after the Manhwa festival, in order to build relationships. Gadolf had several boxers, including the rising star Torres and the reputation of the academy that had produced Ogre Slayer. So, if people could watch a free match, there would be no one who would refuse. Nixar told Gadolf that he would like to invite the Catalan gang boxing team as the opponent. However, if he considers the construction of the mansion as well, it seems that the cost will not be small. Gadolf asked him why they don't just go around to each house and collect an emergency fund or silverware, making him surprised and telling Gadolf that the villagers will be very resistant. Gadolf furiously threw his glass against the wall while shouting at him that it is a problem for him and his soldiers to solve. Then he ordered him to focus on preparing for the match. Gadolf also told him that it was for the sake of saving the territory, so everyone should bear the sacrifice and ordered him to go away. A few days later, a line of luxurious carriages lined up at the mansion, and the Aegis territory was bustling with outsiders for the first time in a while. A free boxing match was rare, and no one refused to watch a match with popular boxers. They watched the boxers fight each other, and the Catalan boxing team were all talented fighters, so they were professional boxers who didn't make a living as slaves. Torres told him that first, the Catalan won, but then someone asked him if he was that famous Callie, but he replied that he was not famous and he was Callie. Then he asked the man if he was a new slave. The man replied that his name was Shram from the south, and he was a sailor, but he told Shram that he didn't look like a sailor. Shram told him that his ship was shipwrecked, and he was captured by a slave trader, so he was there to earn his ransom and go back home. Shram also told him that he is always mentioned when they talk about the strongest person there, but he guessed the rumors were exaggerated because compared to Torres, he is weak, frail, and looks like a cripple. He calmly told Shram that if he is an apprentice, he should train harder, making Shram angry, and he wondered if he didn't care. Shram tell him that it was nice to meet him and suggested a handshake while wondering why a cripple like Kali is compared to Torres, the ace. He accepts Shram's hand while Shram thinks that he'll crush him like a bug and be free. Shram grabbed his hand tightly, knowing that he had been pulling sales ropes for over 5 years and he was not weak in terms of grip strength. But Shram was surprised when he effortlessly shook his hand. He grabs Shram's hands a little tighter, but Shram feels like his bones are going to break. He asks Shram what is wrong because he doesn't look happy while letting Shram's hand go. Shram coughs while Torres tells Shram that he was a newbie fucker who was trying to act tough, and that if he sees Kali fight, he'll never say it again, making Shram silent in anger. He tells Shram that if he wants to pay his ransom and be free, he should watch the matches because he has to beat those guys while looking at the man in front of Kijo on the stage. Kijo looked down and tell himself that he was the best and he was strongest. Then Kijo glared at his enemy and punched the man's face with his long arm. Then the man slowly fell to the ground and couldn't believe that he got hit in that distance. Torres tells them that Kijo really came up in the world and he feels like Kijo wouldn't lose even to Newell because Kijo is completely different from before. On the other hand, on the stage, Kijo continuously attacks the man with his long arms and the man furiously runs toward him while shouting that he can't take it anymore. But Kijo simply punched the man in the face. He realizes that it was true that they had to get in close to beat a taller opponent. But Kijo's enemy was just charging and without any skills. He knows that it would have been better to just endure hits and wait for Kijo to get tired. Torres and Kijo's bump hands and Torres tell him that he did well staying calm. Kijo tells Torres to do well and come back. Then Torres stepped inside the court and the viewers cheered for him loudly. He looked at his enemy, but his vision was blurry, making him think that it was starting again, and he knew that if it kept up, his boxing career would be over. But he was not sure if he can use the techniques Kali taught him in a real fight, so he decided to just try to win with his usual style. The man blocked his attack while teasingly acting amazed to him. Then the man punched Torres back in the face while the man noticed that Torres just kept coming even though he was getting hit, and Torres is worthy of being called the boar of Aegis. But the man swore that he was going to catch Torres today. Torres tried to punch the man, but the man dodged in the side to avoid it, making Torres and Kali understand what the man is doing. Then the man punched Torres in his side, making Torres fall to the ground hard. One of the noble's men shouted that it was the recent trending Wistery style, and the other noble replied that he had never seen it in person before. Kali was surprised because he knows what the style man used. He was sure that the man had seen and used his technique back then. It was commonly known as the Wistery style, and Duke Wistery devised it and tried letting his boxers use it after the Harvest Festival. It was not just the traditional boxers that only showed strength, but now it has changed into showcasing technique. Most people think it was created by Duke Wistery, but people who follow the pugilist fight may know that the technique was invented by Kali. Torres stood up in frustration and attacked the man once again, while Kali thought that anyone who sees it will feel the same thing. The man dodged all his attacks while teasingly asking him if he ever heard about the Wistery technique and telling him that it seems he doesn't know about it. Torres furiously glared at the man. Then he bent down, making the man confused, and positioned himself in the defensive position that Kali taught him. He told the man that he knew the Wistery technique and found it interesting when he looked at it. He ran forward to the man in his current position, planning to try it. The man tried to punch him, and he got hit slightly in his shoulder when he dodged it. Then the man once again tried to punch him, but he completely dodged it, making the man shout in frustration while launching another attack. He blocked it with his arms and composed himself to stay on his ground. The man knew that it was his first time seeing it. Moreover, no matter how hard he hit Torres, he wouldn't move, and he saw that Torres's exposed area was only his side or abdomen. But if he went closer, it wouldn't be good for him. Suddenly, Torres appeared under him, launching an attack. The man dodged it, knowing that he should avoid it, and noticed that Torres's fist was strangely slow. But then he was surprised when he saw Torres glaring at him. Torres moved one of his feet to the side and launched his fist. The man covered himself, knowing that Torres was using his core strength, so he should block it. Torres hit the man guard, completely breaking it. He launched his other fist, making the man realize that it was just a trick. Then Torres hit the man in the chin hard, making the man slam on the ground, bleeding. The nobles happily cheered for him and shouted that Torres still won with great force. Kali knows that the man's Wistery style is pretty similar, and he was so surprised. However, he thinks they still don't consider footwork as part of fighting, and the man's legs barely move. On the other hand, Torres was able to change his strength, and even though he only taught Torres about the guard posture, Torres really has a good boxing sense. After that pugilist fight ended successfully, Gadolf showed a bright smile, and it was because all the nobles in the VIP seats returned to support Gadolf again. The woman nobles told Gadolf that she enjoyed it and hopes she'll participate again. Then the nobleman told Gadolf that it was a good match, making Gadolf happily tell them that he and the state will also become as lively as before. However, there is still no contact with the guests who left earlier, and it is only then that Gadolf realizes that they are just doing lip service and they don't have any intention to help Gadolf, making him fume in anger and shout that those bastards are just coming there to watch a free pugilist match when he even fixed the mansion for them. Gadolf cursed in anger and shoutingly ordered his maid to bring him alcohol. A few weeks later, the man inside the house wonders what will happen to that territory in the future. Gadolf is not only a tyrant, but he is also lacking at managing the territory. Also, he still couldn't believe Gadolf made the knight do the housework like fixing the mansion, and they say that Gadolf also failed to make any connection with other nobles. Then someone called the man his captain, and Callie told the man that he will be back from his training with the wolf next to him. The man asked him if it is a religious day and why he doesn't take a break. He replied that he is just doing it because he likes it. The man asked him if isn't that animal the wolf from that day and what is its name. He replied that it's called Rovo. The man told him that rather than a wolf, it looks like a fat dog, and he should come back there when he is done training, then they can go back together, to which he replied okay. A moment later, he arrived at the forest, and something behind the tree was glaring at them. A moment later, he was continuously punching the tree while thinking that Torres and Kijo had become considerably strong. Also, those boxers there were also improving fast, making him wonder if he would really be able to box again, and if he should have accepted the offer to become an instructor. But then he felt something near them, making him stop, and Rovo felt it too. Rovo began to bark at something in the bush, and he told Rovo to be quiet because he knew what was coming. Then he exhaled and stepped his leg forward while thinking that although it was still a little uncomfortable, he gradually got used to putting his weight on one leg. Then he punched the tree with all his might, making the hole in the tree deeper, but then he felt pain in his hand, and Rovo's ears stood up, hearing something approaching. Rovo barked at him to gain his attention, but he was busy thinking that even if he tried not to burden himself as much as possible, it got a bit overwhelming. Then he told Rovo that he knew something was strange and noticed that it wasn't even windy, but the bushes were shaking. Then he jumped a little in shock when he saw the bear walking out of the bush, making him unable to believe it. He knew that it was strong, but it didn't look like an adult, rather, far from being weak, it looked agile. But he knew that it was impossible to run away with his legs. Rovo angrily growled at the bear, and he told Rovo that it was better than him, all the while thinking that he should have brought an axe with him. Suddenly, the bear stood up and growled at him furiously, but he just laughed and positioned himself, asking himself what he could trust if he didn't trust his fists. Then the bear launched its sharp claws to attack him, and fortunately, he dodged it. He punched the bear in the face, making the bear's nose bleed. Then Rovo barked at the bear angrily, making the bear's attention distracted, so he punched the bear in the chin, sending its head flying. However, the bear managed to attack him back with its claws, and he got hit in the chest, causing him to bleed in pain. Then the bear jumped toward him to attack again, but he launched his fist forward to attack it too. Meanwhile, in the house, the captain was still sleeping. However, he suddenly heard someone knocking on the door. The captain, feeling alarmed, grabbed the axe for safety and asked the person continuously knocking if it was Callie. When the person didn't answer, the captain began to sweat in fear. He then forcefully opened the door while shouting, "Who is there?" To his shock, he saw Callie, who was standing in front of him, covered in injuries. The captain asked him why he had opened the door so late and expressed his worry. In response, Callie just smiled and replied that they should have bear stew for dinner that night. When Callie entered the house, the captain was shocked to see a dead bear behind him. News of Callie catching the bear quickly spread around. Objectively, it wasn't even a fully grown adult bear, but it wasn't thin and weak either. Catching a bear with bare hands seemed ridiculous to some people, and they thought it was a lie and an exaggeration. However, the loggers believed it without a doubt because, by the end of winter, they had seen trees clearly broken by human fists. As the harsh winter passed, the estate became full of life for the first time in a while. Someone shouted to the estate that Lady Azalea was coming, so they should open the gate. Carriages filled with a lot of products entered the gate with Azalea, and the citizens were amazed to see a lot of salt and wool inside the carriages. Azalea dismounted her horse and asked the knight where her father was. The knight replied that Gadolf was probably in the mansion. Azalea expressed her disappointment, mentioning that it had been a while since she had come back and that it was rude of her father not to come to meet her. However, as she looked around, she saw a woman and her son smiling while walking past her. The little boy had yellow hair and a bright smile, which made Azalea smile and hope that Callie was doing well. On the other hand, in the slave area, he asked someone if Azalea had come back while feeding Rovo. The man replied that she had, and Azalea was so amazing because she could be on top of herself. He replied that it was amazing. The man told him that it was the reason there would be a party at the mansion, and it had been a while since they had meat, so it would be their first time having meat besides bear's meat. Rovo excitedly looked at him, but he told Rovo that it can't go with him and it can't go to the mansion with him, making Rovo sad. but he apologized to it and swore that he'll give it something. A moment later, he was busy eating at the table when the knight told him that Azalea had called him. Then he went inside the mansion, and Gadolf told him that he had arrived there. Azalea told him that it had been a long time since they saw each other and asked him about the condition of his leg. He replied that it was still the same, but he was used to it, so he wouldn't feel uncomfortable anymore, although she knew that there was no way he wouldn't feel uncomfortable. Then Azalea talked about how she had risen to the top and mentioned that Joseph had made it difficult by interfering here and there, making Gadolf furiously call Joseph a dirty human and a dirty piece of shit. She told Gadolf that it was why she went to the Imperial City so that the pressure from Joseph wouldn't work, and she would be able to buy the supplies. Gadolf told her that she did well and that he expected it from his daughter. He had heard that the Imperial region had a strong military power, and he also heard that the language and customs were similar because they shared the same roots with the kingdom there. She told them that she had heard an interesting story there and said that she was sure he'd also be interested in that story, which was the reason why she had called him, making him surprised. Then she told them that she had heard about a famous doctor there, a doctor of the imperial family who was also called the God Doctor because he amputated and attached limbs. Gadolf said that to that extent, he was really an imperial doctor. However, there was no way an imperial doctor would cure a noble from a kingdom like theirs. She told her father that if she was the one who asked for it, it was possible because she had connections with the imperial family, and in the imperial city that liked to fight, any gladiators who were injured while fighting were welcomed. So, she was thinking of taking Callie there with her after she had rested enough there. Gadolf lifted her up happily and shouted that she was such a blessing, making her embarrassed. On the other hand, Callie couldn't believe that his leg had a chance to get healed and asked her if it was true that his leg could really be healed. She replied, of course, and she would definitely find a way to make it happen. But the truth was, she knew it was impossible to meet the royal family for a low-rank noble like her, so she hoped Callie didn't find out what was behind it. Later, he was busy watching the other fighters running and wondered if his leg had a chance to be healed. Nixar asked him who he was thinking about and if it was the kid over there who would be okay to fight, making him surprised and confused. Nixar told him that tomorrow was the apprentice pugilist test. He replied that he was thinking about the kid over there but changed it by explaining that he was thinking about taking Takayan or Shram. Nixar told him that Takayan had great flexibility and moved like a leopard, and Shram had good muscles and a strong motivation to go back to his hometown. He told Nixar that it was nice to have a motive, making Nixar wonder if he was thinking about something else and why Callie looked so sad when his leg was going to be treated. Later, in their room, he knew that it was an exaggeration to say that he believed someone whom others told him could attach a limb, and the medical knowledge there was far behind modern times. Also, after he fought Ogre, there were no painkillers, antibiotics, or surgery available, so he really relied on luck. He wondered what if it was just an empty dream, what if he couldn't heal it, and what should he do? Then he slammed his hand on the table, telling himself to wake up because he should be optimistic, and it was Azalea's hard work. Kijo asked him why he hit the table so hard and told him that Rovo was surprised. But he just asked Kijo if it was his room and told him to go back to training. Kijo told him that he had a pugilist apprentice test tomorrow, so he would take a break today. He asked Kijo why he became a pugilist, making Kijo ask him what he meant. He told Kijo that he must have a reason or something he wanted to achieve. Kijo told him to reason his ass, and he just did it because there was nothing else he could do. Then Kijo hugged Rovo, telling Rovo that it was so cute, making Callie think it was like he was talking to a single-cell creature. Then Kijo asked him what about him and what he wanted to achieve. The next day, the apprentice pugilist test was conducted. An apprentice became a formal pugilist if they received good remarks from the instructor for their skill. But in Aegis, the apprentice pugilist test was more like a formality where the apprentice who got first place would take a test to become a formal pugilist. However, not everyone knew about it, and the apprentices picked their pugilist opponents by drawing lots and then fought them. The instructor called Kijo, and Kijo walked forward, laughingly asking if he was the first to start. He knew that Kijo would fight the apprentice with his great footwork, and it was inevitable to use an outboxing technique to widen the distance due to Kijo's body. He had gotten used to it because Kijo always used it, and he knew that Kijo and Toras were strong. So, even with his training in the mountain, he couldn't be compared to how strong they were now. He was frustrated that he hadn't used the skills he trained in the mountain yet, and whether he could use his leg properly or not, he wanted to become stronger. The instructor called Shram to come forward, but Shram just walked past the instructor and asked him if he was not trying to avoid fighting just because of his leg. Then Shram teasingly told him that they should play, making his anger fume even more. One of the instructors tells Nixar that Shram is straight up choosing his opponent. But Nixar stops the instructor and thinks that even if it can get Shram disqualified, he wants to confirm how Callie is going to fight with that leg because there is no way Shram was just bluffing to buy time. Callie stood up and asked Shram why he chose him, and Shram replied that he was humiliated by him last time, so he wanted to show him how strong he was now. He tells Shram that if he is going to fight him, he won't avoid it and asks someone to lend him a hand leather strap. After that, they both enter the ring. Shram looks at him and wonders why he wraps the cloth around his fist. But he just calls Shram and asks him if he trains his abdomen a lot. Shram heard that. Unlike Callie's nickname of Ogre Slayer, Callie fights not only with a strong fist but also with technique and brain. But now that one of Callie's legs is broken, it was like a fight with half of Callie's ability. While kicking the sand to block his vision, he still saw that Shram's attack was coming to the left, so he blocked it, making Shram shocked. Then he punched Shram in the side, making Shram cough out his saliva in pain. One of the trainees shouted that it was the empty defense, and Torres, who was shocked, wondered since when Callie's fist became so heavy. Shram slowly fell and was kneeling on the ground in pain. The instructor asked Shram if he was okay, but Shram didn't answer, feeling his ribs were broken. Still, Shram told the instructor that it was just the beginning and he could still do it. On the other hand, he knows that he wrapped his fist with cloth and leather, but he thinks he hit the right spot and asks Shram if he just hung in there with his strong determination, not his strong muscles, because it was not bad. Shram tells him that he really can defeat a bear and thinks that the rumor is not a lie. Shram felt the pain in his body, making him shake. But he knew that he couldn't lose against someone who couldn't even use his leg properly. Shram knows that he got hit on the side, but his leg got affected by it too. He teasingly asks Shram, who can't use the leg properly, making Shram curse himself in anger and think that it was not what he heard about Callie. One of the trainees called Shram and asked him why he was just stuck in his place and what he was doing with his legs. Shram replied that he knew what he should do. Then Shram jumped around him while shouting that he was not like Callie and that he could still move around. Suddenly, he felt his leg hurt when he moved it and saw that Shram would attack him. He got hit by Shram's fist in the face because he couldn't move, and Shram proudly planned to keep pushing him like that. But Shram was surprised to see that he was glaring at him and speedily punched him back in the face. It made a loud noise, and Shram was thrown hard to the ground because of the force. Then Shram collapsed on the ground and was defeated. Later, Shram felt his face throb while something told him that he had just chosen the wrong opponent, and that no matter how bad Callie's leg was, Callie was still the Ogre Slayer. He shouted to Nixar that all the trainers there deceived him, and no one said that Callie was still that strong. But then the other instructor hit Shram in the back while laughing and told him that he knows he was angry, but no one lied to him. Until last year, Callie just used his technique. Then Nixar told Shram that they had never seen Callie use a strong fist before, making Shram wonder how Callie could have such a strong fist in just a winter and think that Callie was just like an ogre, and worst, a monster. Suddenly, someone told Callie that he didn't expect it at all, and Torres told him that he didn't expect him to change his fighting style. Also, he didn't expect he'd throw away his fight technique and focus on using his strength. He told Torres that he just changed his strategy and now it was not like he was going to avoid it and then hit, but more like he'll hit it somehow. Torres smiled while telling him in his mind that his leg was like it. But now he was showing something new, making him think that it seemed like his blood was boiling, and he really wanted to fight with him right now and see who was the stronger one between them. Then Torres told him that it wasn't a bluff that he'd make a comeback even with that leg, but still, there must be someone who doesn't believe it. He told Torres that he'd just let them think again. Then he sat down while thinking that it was more burdensome than he thought and that it was impossible to do a pugilist match without a properly working leg. He knew that he used his knees and thighs to reduce the burden on his injured leg, but it put strain on his back, so he thought he needed to fix his distribution of strength. After the apprentice test was over, spring came, and after taking some rest, the merchants that Arsha brought left the territory. They were on the road when someone suggested that they should take a rest there while he stayed with Rovo, who noticed someone and barked at that person. The lady asked him if he was the one favored by their lady Arsha and if he was Callie. Then she told him that he was handsome. He replied that his face wouldn't give him any benefit because he was just a slave. The lady agreed, telling him that it was such a pity. But she didn't care whether he was a slave or not and asked him if saying that she liked seeing his face was not a bad thing. Then she introduced herself as Salavan from the Salavan mercenary group and mentioned that she was the captain of those men while pointing at the men behind her and telling him that they were not bad guys. He introduced himself to her and accepted her hand while she asked him if he really beat the bear as she had heard the rumor inside the territory. Then Salavan began to talk to him while noticing that his expression looked sad and wondered if it was because she came alone. But she knew that there was nothing she could do about it. Then one of her men called her to tell her to stop chatting and help them set up a tent, to which she replied that she understood and she was coming. He offered to help too, but she told him that there was no need, knowing that his leg was still uncomfortable. Then Salavan walked away, leaving him with Rovo, looking around and feeling awkward. Arsha told him that she guessed he didn't have anything important to do, and they really cared about his leg, so it would be hard for him to help them. He reminded her that she was part of it too, but then she told him that they couldn't keep their awkward circumstances and ordered him to follow her and prepare for what would happen next, making him look at her in confusion. Then she shyly told him that he would have a meal with her. He followed her and commented that those mercenaries were still young because most of them were in their teens or at most in their 20s. She replied that there was no mercenary group that would follow a young girl like her, and there was a superstition that it would bring misfortune if a young girl became the captain. He told her that it wasn't true, but she said there was nothing she could do about that myth, and she had no choice but to form a mercenary group that was in a similar situation as her. Also, no one wanted them because they were young. Then she told him that she would bring the meal, and she also brought his, making him surprised, but she just told him to eat there. He tried to disagree, but she shyly told him to sit, and they should eat together. So he sat down and took a spoonful of his food, then ate it while feeling that it was even more awkward. Then Arsha called his name seriously and asked him why he was fighting and if it was to achieve his freedom. He replied that it was just like every other slave. She told him that he wasn't like the other slaves because he could run away or find a better situation, and asked him why he still wanted to be a pugilist when it was not as if his life would be ruined if he stopped being a pugilist. He asked her back why she was suddenly bringing up that topic, but she asked him again if he could choose between his leg and freedom, which one would he choose? He replied that he didn't like the word if, so she told him that if that was the case, she'd suggest something to him. If he gave up on the treatment of his leg, she'd make him a free man because she'd persuade his father. He told her that she was right, but he didn't need freedom, he just wanted to prove that he was the strongest by winning every match over and over again. Also, he'd rather have losers lying in front of him, and it was worth more to him than gold, silver, or treasure, so he'd choose his leg. She let go of his hand and told him that she was tired, so she'd leave first. Then she lay on her bed and clenched her heart in pain, thinking that Callie was a stupid guy. But she decided not to care and thought that in the future, when Callie meets someone he loves, he'll realize the value of his life. However, it'll be too late because he wasted it fighting, and when crucial times come, he won't be able to fight anymore. Sullivan asked him why his face looked so stiff, and he awkwardly replied that it was nothing. She asked him if it was because of his leg and told him to just hang in there a bit longer because he'll be in the free city of Corin soon. He asked her what she meant by a free city, and she replied that it meant a city without hereditary lords. It was chosen as a special commercial district where they elect their lord through elections. Also, wealthy merchants pay huge amounts of money to campaign, and it's common to buy, kidnap, or assassinate members of other families. But he told her that it still has nice surroundings, and she told him that it just happens behind the scenes. On the outside, it's more vibrant than other cities. A moment later, they arrived at the free city's gate, and the guard checked Azalea's background first, seeing that her stay was for 7 days. He informed her that she could extend it at the city hall. Then the guard noticed Rovo and asked if it wasn't a wolf, saying that wild animals couldn't enter. He replied that it was a dog and that it was a hybrid with wolf blood. The guard then ordered Rovo to bark, but Rovo just fearfully cowered down, making the guard think it was a fool that couldn't even bark, so he let them pass. As they passed the gate, Sullivan laughingly asked him if he said it was a dog and how could he lie like that. He just smiled, unaware that the guard was reporting to his companion that the individuals from Aegis had arrived and instructed them to inform the other guards. Later, they arrived at the shore and saw many people around. While Azalea was busy looking at something, Sullivan said that the smell of the sea is perfect and it is such a nice place to visit, but he was just sitting, thinking that he wanted to eat sashimi and soju. Suddenly, a flyer flew onto his face and he grabbed it, wondering what it was. Sullivan told him that it was about the Korean pugilist tournament and asked if it's time. He asked him what a pugilist tournament is, and she replied that usually, pugilists get paid for their matches. However, tournaments are events where participants pay an entry fee to compete, and if they win, they can receive a large amount of money, making him understand it. Then Sullivan told him that it was embarrassing, but she really loved watching pugilist matches, so she'd go with him. Suddenly, they heard Azalea shoutingly asking someone what they are doing and saw knights pointing their weapons at them. The chief greeted Azalea and introduced himself as Leonardo, the chief of Corin guards. Then he told her that there had been a report of weapons smuggling against her, so he'd appreciate it if she'd follow him for a moment. She replied that they won't do it and that it was a false accusation. Also, she already went through the inspection and passed normally. Leonardo touched his sword while telling Azalea that if she wanted to end it quietly, she should just follow him, making Callie and Sullivan glare at Leonardo in anger. Later, in the guard receptionist room, Leonardo told Azalea that honestly, the report is a lie, and it seems she has disrupted the beauty of the Joseph family. He explained to Azalea that he received a letter instructing him to detain the Aegis merchant party for any reason, and although it's not mandatory, it's quite intriguing. She asked him why did he arrange a private arrangement like it with her and what does he want, making him tell her that it was nice they can communicate well. A moment later, the knights are shocked to hear 10,000 guilds and ask if they think getting 10,000 guilds is easy while Leonardo is hummingly walking away. The knights tell Azalea that even if they sell everything there, it's impossible for them to get 10,000 guilds, and they also have a tight schedule to travel around the empire, to which she replies that she also knows it. She knows that even with the cash she has and the loan that she can receive, she can only get 5,000 guilds, so she needs 5,000 guilds more. On the other hand, Callie knows that wherein Joseph is really trying to stop him and that Punk's father, Count Joseph, is also trying to target that merchant group. Sullivan asks if it is the end of that merchant group and thinks that maybe she needs to find someone that can hire her, but he calls her, making her panicky, asks him if he heard her and apologizes. Then, she explained that the kind of problem can't be solved only with her knife skills. He tells her that he was not asking her about it and he wanted to ask about the tournament earlier. Then he asked her if there was any special qualification to participate. She replied that it just needed 100 guilds and he needed to pass the test given by the active pugilist. Then he asked how much the prize was and she replied 8,000 guilds. But Azalea told him that there was no way, making everyone in the room silent. The knights told Azalea that if Callie wins, they will need to secure just 2,000 guilds, and Callie won over the ogre in the past, so it will be easy. But she furiously asks the knights if they are out of their minds and if they want her to send someone with that leg. Sullivan thinks that was it, and the noble and his slave is not a romance novel story. The knight tells Azalea that it is the only way, and if they are detained like that, the Joseph family will come. Suddenly, Callie punched the table hard, breaking it in half. Then he tells Azalea that he promised his master that he would make a comeback from that summer, and that the tournament will be his stage to prove it. She silently thought for a few seconds, exhaled while releasing her grip, and told Callie that she understood, but since she was allowing it, he should make sure to win that tournament, to which he tells her that it was a promise. Later, in admission, the man asked him if he said Coley, and he replied that it was Callie. But the man just told him that Coley or Callie, he had received his application, so he could leave now while thinking that he already handles his share of weird guys. But he was confused how come someone with that kind of leg wants to join the tournament. Sullivan pointed at someone and asked him if he saw that bald guy over there, then told him that the bald guy is the judge for the pugilist. Then he saw the bald guy shouting to others that they were jerks and asking if they could only do that much. Then teasingly told the others to just go back to their mother and drink her milk or just go buy some milk. Callie tells Sullivan that the bald guy's appearance and his behavior really do match. Also, his head is so shiny, but Sullivan just inhaled deeply and calls the man a bald bastard, telling the man that he really looks like a baby that needs to drink more milk. Callie panicky asks Sullivan what she is thinking by doing it, but when he looks at her, she vanishes. Suddenly, the bald guy calls him an asshole to get his attention and furiously orders him to come on the stage. The people were shocked to see him walking and couldn't believe that his leg was broken. The bald guy told him that it is the place only for the contestants to participate, so he should just get lost. He showed his ticket and told the bald guy that he was also a contestant. The bald guy couldn't believe it and furiously said that now even the guy who can barely walk wants to join a pugilist match. Then he told him to come on, and he'll teach him a lesson. He walked inside the stage and snapped his neck while Sullivan watched from above, wondering if Callie is really the famous ogre slayer and if he is really that Callie. Then she apologized to Callie because she just ran away, but she was sure he'd be okay if he was the ogre slayer. She sat down comfortably thinking that Callie just needed to win. Suddenly, they heard a loud noise, and they all stood up in shock when they saw the bald guy down in just a minute. The bald guy couldn't believe that Callie beat him with a leg like that. But Callie just asked the bald guy if he wanted more. A moment later, Sullivan laughingly told him that she guessed that him winning that competition wasn't just a coincidence, and this is her first time looking at that kind of punch. He told her that it was just because the opponent was careless, so the bald guy passed out easily. She told him that it was also a skill to make his opponent's guard down, and he was great. He drank water while Sullivan told him that she thought they should come back there tomorrow afternoon. Then she stared at him and thought that looking at Callie's aura, he doesn't look like an ordinary slave, making her understand why that noble lady fell in love with him. The night came, and he was in his room thinking that today's opponent was an easy one because he just believed in his size and strength alone. Also, the problem is with the whistle style, and if they can make an opportunity because of his lack of mobility, it'll be difficult. The next day in the afternoon, the man shouted to everyone that the participants would start to fight. Azalea looked at the sweating participants and covered her nose, thinking that they are nasty. He told Azalea that she could just stay there and asked her why did she follow him there. Azalea was about to vomit, so she told him that she'll leave first. Then the host told the participant that they should start looking for the opponents. He grabbed one in the box and got number 4, so the host told him that he'll fight with a number 3. He thought it would be easier if the organizers just do it randomly, making Sullivan tell him that he really doesn't know anything. Then she explained to him that it was different from the usual matches he used to because he'd play every day except for the finale and semifinal, and he had to win 5 consecutive matches. Then she asked him what if he met a strong opponent from the beginning, and he replied that it would be a disadvantage because of the accumulation of injuries and fatigue. She asked him if now he understood why they drew like that and explained to him that they did it so that no one could manipulate it, and there was also quite a lot of money moving behind the scenes. Also, the prizes are big, making him understand that it was like a gambling match. A moment later, the host called numbers 1 and 2 to come to the ring, and the fighters gazed at each other, making Sullivan amazed because she noticed that the fighters' gaze was not a joke. Then the host called numbers 3 and 4, and the man walked up the stage with the number 3 paper, and before he walked up the stage, Sullivan told him that his opponent looked like a pugilist enthusiast. The host called the number 3 player Spyron and him to stand facing each other, to which they did. Spyron smilingly greeted him and told him that they should have a good game. He accepted Spyron's hand while the people booed and shouted that there was a nerd and a disabled today, so they'd have 2 easy opponents. Sullivan told him that maybe Spyron is from a wealthy family and Spyron just wanted to try his fighting skills, so he became a participant there, making him realize that it was why she just called Spyron a pugilist match enthusiast, and noticed that Spyron's hands didn't seem rough. Sullivan told him that Spyron looks like an easy opponent, so he should just beat him up because nobles are so annoying, to which he replied that he knew it. Later, Sullivan asked the men if they believed in a woman like her, and the men asked her back why she was suddenly taking out a bag full of money and if she wanted to divide their salary now because it is a good thing. She asked her men if they also knew that it was their half-year salary, and one of the men replied that they knew because they left the calculation to her because they believe in her, to which she nods in agreement. Then she tells them that she'll use all the money to bet on Callie's side in that tournament, making everyone shocked and asking her if she is crazy. She replies that she is not crazy and asks them why. One of the men asks her back if she really will bet on that guy who has such a leg, and she asks them if they ever lost money after listening to her. The man replied no, and no one had died in 2 years, so he laughingly asked them why they just believed her now, and they replied that it was because they knew when she would get hit and miss. She tells them that it was just her instinct that told her to do it, and now it's the perfect time to do it, making her men look at each other in silence. One of the men raised his hand and told her that he agreed. Then the others agreed too while shouting that if it wasn't because of their captain, which is her, they wouldn't survive the mercenary life, and that thing is just something that they can start over. The men in front of her tell her to screw it, and he doesn't know anymore, but both raise their hands in agreement, making her smilingly tell them that they made a good choice. Then she orders her men to disperse because they should go back to their quarters without knowing that Azalea is hiding behind the wall, and sees that they are doing something interesting. The next day, the first game of the 32-round tournament started. The first and second participants began fighting in the ring. He noticed that the level there was higher than he had imagined, and after the man blocked the opponent's sight, he went straight to the blind spot. He knew that it is basic in modern boxing, but he thought it was unusual there, and the man must have had a lot of experience to do it. Then, the man's opponent fell to the ground, and the host shouted that the winner was participant number 2. The audience cheered for number 2, while the other was furiously asking number 1 if he knew how much he bet on him. He said that it was so noisy, and the host called him because it was his turn, so he got down on the stage and walked toward the ring with an injured leg. The audience murmured that he was limping and asked how he could win with that kind of body and if he would even survive or not. He walked inside the ring, and Spyron told him not to listen to other people's reactions and that he wouldn't look down on him even if he didn't have a good leg. He thought, like what Sullivan said, if Spyron really is noble, maybe he'll face a problem later if he punches him too hard, so he decided to win by moderation by hitting Spyron's chin not that hard. Spyron told him that he'd go first and speedily appeared in front of him, then punched him hard in the face, making his nose bleed. Then, Spyron continuously punched him. He covered himself with his hand, knowing that he needed to defend himself first. Spyron twisted his feet, then punched him in the side. He bled out while thinking that he wouldn't let Spyron win, and he wouldn't let him do as he pleased. Then he punched Spyron back, making Spyron jump away and smilingly tell him that now his fist looks so scary. Spyron speedily jumped to his left and right, making him ask Spyron if it was Whistly style. Spyron asked him if he knew about it and told him that he went to Duke Whistly to learn it. He smiled, knowing that it was his style at first, so he knew it really well. Then, he thought that Spyron had been taking advantage of his opponent's carelessness, so he decided to get serious now. He then punched Spyron with his left hand, but Spyron dodges it, which opened his side, so Spyron saw it and punched him in the side. But Spyron was surprised to feel his side hard as a rock. He remembered that he had seen Torres when he fought earlier, but now he was sure that Whistly style didn't have perfect footwork. The strength when their foot hits the ground doesn't transmit to their fist perfectly, and a fist without strength is a big problem because their muscles can't deliver more impact to the opponent. He was about to punch Spyron, but Spyron jumped back while shouting to him that his kind of attack wouldn't work on him. He decided to corner Spyron, but then he felt his leg hurt. Still, he decided to go even though his leg was hurting so much. Then he jumped, deciding to finish Spyron in one go. Spyron was shocked to see him in front of him, but he just punched Spyron in the side, making Spyron cough his saliva out and feel his leg hurting. Spyron swung his hurting leg backward and glared at him while thinking that he should have trained his abdomen more. But then, he stepped on Spyron's other foot and launched his fist towards Spyron's chin, who was calling him a son of a bitch. Then a loud bam sound could be heard when he hit Spyron's chin. He walked off the stage while the man looked at him and wondered how he could win against someone who uses a whistly style, thinking that he was sure it was quite good. A moment later, someone called him Kali to ask how dare he do that. Then Spyron walked inside the room and called him a shameless son of a bitch in anger. Spyron got the attention of the participants inside the room and glared at him in anger. Then one of the men asked Spyron how dare he say it to a pugilist and called him a son of a noble. The man also told Spyron that it was a place to fight and asked him if he thought there was room for complaining about someone stepping on his foot. Another man called Spyron a rascal, telling him that in that place, such things were just normal. Kali remembered that he experienced worse than that, like someone throwing sand and grabbing his hand, so if they didn't have much experience, they must think it was cheating. He was like that in the past too. Then he grabbed Spyron's shoulder and whispered to him to follow him because he'd teach him something good. When they were outside, Spyron asked him if he wanted to fight one more time there, and he replied that if they fought on the street, he would have already been dead, making Spyron angry and shoutingly telling him that the pugilist in Whistly recognized his ability. He calmly told Spyron that he acknowledged his skill too, but he learned it wrong, making Spyron confused and asking him what he meant by learning it wrong. He told Spyron that moving his leg fast didn't mean it was a good move because he would be the one who'd get tired first. Besides, he needed to move his body properly and use the power from his leg to his fist. Spyron spread his legs and punched in the air like he had just instructed him. Spyron asked him if it was like that. He nodded and told Spyron to learn it over and over. He explained to Spyron that it was hard to make a strong hit with only the strength of his upper body. Suddenly, Spyron softly grabbed his fist and happily called him Kali to tell him that he was such a good fellow. He told Spyron that his name was Kali, making Spyron confused, but he clarified that his name was Kali, not Kali. Spyron waved goodbye to him while telling him that whether he was Kali or Kali, he should just keep fighting because he beat him, so he should be the winner. Then Spyron walked away thinking about Kali's name and wondered where he heard that name. 2 days later, Sullivan told him that he looked like he'd have easy opponents until the 8th round, while Azalea looked at him worriedly in silence. He replied that it was really not easy and it was a relief that everyone was exhausted from their previous games. Azalea grabbed her shoulder tightly while thinking that he got hurt again. Suddenly, they heard some audience walking outside angrily, saying that if it wasn't for that lame kid, he would win, and he was such a bad luck kid. Sullivan told him not to mind their words because they were just upset they lost their money, and he replied that he didn't care at all. Then Sullivan told him that all he needed to do was to observe his next opponent. The audience was hyped, shouting to the man named Jureka to smash his opponent, claiming they bet everything on him. Sullivan told them that pugilist Jureka was a slave from the western desert area, and was popular for smashing his opponents. As a pugilist, she thought Jureka could become a free citizen if he could gather such a crowd. Azalea asked Sullivan why Jureka didn't quit being a pugilist if he could be a free man. Sullivan replied that Jureka simply enjoyed torturing people through pugilist matches. Jureka teasingly told his opponent to hit him more, and the man called Jureka a crazy guy. The man then punched Jureka in the face, but Jureka just smiled at him and punched back while shouting that the punch did not hurt at all. Jureka and the man punched each other continuously, but then the man stopped in exhaustion, thinking it's strange because he definitely hit him, and wonder if Jureka was really immortal since he didn't back down despite the hits. The man was about to surrender, but Jureka speedily punched the man's hand to its face, smilingly asking if he thought he could surrender easily. Jureka continuously punched the man in the face while the referee told him that his opponent had just said he surrendered. He creepily smiled and apologized to the referee, explaining that he didn't hear. Then the medical team took Jureka's opponent away, and the referee announced that the winner was number 8, Jureka. Sullivan asked Kali what he thought because Jureka was his next opponent and if he thought he could win. He replied that when he looked at Jureka's game, he didn't think he'd lose but cut his words and became silent. Azalea worriedly asked him what he meant by but he just told her to never mind it, making Azalea more worried, and Sullivan said that it was boring. While watching the fight, he noticed that Jureka didn't have many skills, but his physical ability was quite good. Still, he didn't feel anything special like Ogre. However, there was something that felt dangerous about Jureka. The day after tomorrow, round 4. The audience is going crazy, cheering for Jureka, while Kali's team remains silent on the other side. Azalea worriedly tells Sullivan that everyone is cheering for Jureka, so he already has an advantage. Sullivan reassures her not to worry because Kali isn't the type to easily get demotivated by only those kinds of atmospheres. Sullivan tells Kali to just win that fight because she bet all on him. On the other hand, Kali is waiting for the referee to call him and notices that Jureka has a strong supporter base. Then he remembers that rather than clumsily hitting the opponent, Jureka chooses to hit the vital point. The referee shouts to everyone that the eagerly awaited semi-final is about to start now. Then the referee calls Jureka and Kali onto the stage. Jureka teasingly asks who is that guy in front of him, if it isn't unfair, and how can they want him to hit him. Then Jureka laughs so hard that he is holding his stomach, and he smiles, speedily punching Kali. Fortunately, Kali avoids it in time. Jureka tells him that he is pretty good, and Kali clenches his fist in anger, knowing that Jureka started even when the referee did not declare it. The referee warns Jureka and tells him that if he does it again, it would be a foul, to which Jureka sweetly replies yes. However, Jureka thinks it's just some bullshit because if the audience doesn't notice it, it will be fine. Then the referee starts their fight, and Kali knew that an aggressive person like Jureka would attack first, which was correct because Jureka launched his fist forward toward him, trying to punch him. But Kali dodges it in time and punches Jureka in the stomach. He pierces his fist harder into Jureka's stomach, thinking it's the end. Then Jureka falls on the ground, coughing blood out. The audience angrily asks if this is how pugilists fight and tells Jureka that they can't believe he lost to a lame guy like Kali. However, Kali knows that it was his strongest punch and he thinks Jureka won't get up. The referee asks the shaking Jureka on the ground if he is dead, but then Jureka opens his eyes wider and angrily asks the referee back who he thinks is dead, leaving Kali shocked. Jureka smilingly tells him that it was great because it made him feel uncomfortable for a short time and asks him why he looked like he was trembling. He couldn't believe that Jureka stood up when he was sure Jureka wouldn't get up after his punch. He tells Jureka that he should avoid his attack this time or he'll die, but Jureka just laughingly tells him that it was bullshit and his punch feels like a tickle to him. Then Jureka begins to move left and right in front of him, making him realize that Jureka still moves here and there like he did earlier. If he hit Jureka again in the abdomen, it would make him go down because he was shocked before adding up. However, he doesn't want to kill people with his fist, so he decides to do it moderately. He launches his fist, but his punch doesn't hit Jureka, and he immediately covers his face when he sees Jureka launching his fist toward him. He gets hit in the shoulder, and he is surprised to see another attack from Jureka. Fortunately, he dodges it in time. Jureka tells him that it was a pity and that if he got hit this time, he'd be done for. He realizes that it was the reason why Jureka's previous opponent was hopeless, and Jureka was stronger than he thought. Then he calls Jureka, telling him that now he has abandoned the thought of not killing people with his fist, so he'll kill him properly. Jureka teasingly responds that he is scary, but that's what he would do to him and launches another punch at him. He puts some of his strength into his feet even though it hurts, bends down to avoid Jureka's punch, and positions himself. Then he swings forward his fist and punches Jureka's side with all his might, breaking few of Jureka's ribs. Jureka clenches his teeth in pain but then teasingly laughs at him. Jureka tells him that it is such funny nonsense and punches him in the face, making him surprised because he is sure that he has broken Jureka's bone. Jureka once again punches him in the face while shouting for him to just die. He covers his face with his arm and realizes that Jureka is not only strong because he has a strong supporter base. He knows that he needs to block them while Jureka continuously punches him. Then Jureka punches him with a strong punch while shouting to him that he is invincible. He is thrown because of it, but he manages to stop himself from being pushed and counters a punch in Jureka's stomach. Jureka coughs blood due to his attack, but Jureka spits it out in his face, which blinds him. Then Jureka launches his fist forward and punches him in the chin, making him thrown down on the ground hard. The audience excitedly cheers for Jureka, telling him to crush Kali, while Azalea bites her nails in worry, which Sullivan notices. Sullivan tells her that she looks really worried and explains to her that Kali is not an easy guy. But the truth is that Sullivan was screaming at Kali to win that fight because her money depends on him. On the other hand, Kali is lying on the ground and notices that as he expected, Jureka finishes by attacking his opponent's chin like last time. But fortunately, he tilts his head and avoids it. He peeks at Jureka and thinks that Jureka looks like he doesn't feel any pain while Jureka laughingly shouts that he is blessed and has an immortal body. Then Jureka tells him that he is different from him because he only has a crippled body. He slowly stands up and tells Jureka that it is not a blessing. He also tells Jureka that his body is already broken here and there, so it is too late to realize it. But Jureka just asks him if he didn't hear him and repeats to him that he was blessed with an immortal body. He firmly tells Jureka that there is no immortal body and he'll prove it by killing him. He knows that he abandoned all the strategies he planned and decided to just crush Jiraiya with all his might. Then he positions his damaged leg and swings his fist forward while telling himself to hold a little longer. Jiraiya teasingly tells him that it won't work, but he just punches him. Jiraiya was shocked to see that one of his hands is broken, which makes him realize that Kali got his hand, and it was so fast that even the audience didn't notice it. Then Jiraiya punches him again, but he bends down in time and positions his hurting leg while telling himself to hold on just one more. Then he swings his fist again with all his might and hits Jiraiya's side once again. His fist pierces Jiraiya's side, which 100% breaks his ribs again and makes Jiraiya spit out blood. He tiredly catches his breath and puts his hurting leg behind him. Jiraiya smiles seeing it and asks him if his leg is his weakness. Then Jiraiya walks closer to him while the audience shouts for Jiraiya that he is the best and he should show them his spirit. But he just waits for Jiraiya to come closer to him. Then Jiraiya stamps his feet in front of him when he gets closer and laughingly stares at him. The referee notices Jiraiya's weird expression, but he just raises his hand softly and pushes Jiraiya. Then Jiraiya slams down on the ground easily while still smiling. 7 years ago, in the western desert, Jiraiya, who was 15 years old, was working in a cave. Suddenly, a huge stone fell in his direction, and someone yelled a warning. However, he wasn't fast enough to avoid it and got crushed. In a panic, someone shouted that there was someone there and Jiraiya was crushed by the stone. 3 days later, Jiraiya opened his eyes, feeling as though he had received a blessing from God. He possessed greater power than anyone else and his body felt no pain. Jiraiya crushed the slave who had tormented him and left the western desert. Arriving in Korin, he believed he was the strongest, invincible, and blessed by God. However, upon meeting Kali, he saw a crack inside his body and found himself on the ground. Despite his severe injuries, he still believed he was immortal. The referee checked Jiraiya's pulse and announced that Jiraiya couldn't continue the match, declaring Kali the winner. Kali raised his hand while his feet were trembling and the audience, who had believed in him, cheered happily for his victory. Salavan, excited, stood up and told Azalea that Kali had won. When Salavan looked at her, she was surprised to see her crying with joy. She awkwardly looked away while Azalea tried to cover her face. The audience, cheering, proclaimed Kali the best. Spirn, hearing his name continuously, realized that he was the ogre slayer, Kali. The next day, at Kali and the group's accommodation, Kali was surprised by something and asked what it was. Everyone recognized Kali and came to the accommodation to call him the ogre slayer and inquire about his legs. Astonished that they knew his nickname, Kali listened as Salavan teasingly told him that he was now the most popular pugilist. Among the audience who watched his match in Korin were those who had seen him at the Whistle Harvest Festival. Salavan urged him to have breakfast as they were going to see a doctor she knew well. Kali's match with Jiraiya had garnered much attention, and rumors spread that he was the same ogre slayer, Kali. Meanwhile, in the back alleys, Volton, a pugilist match participant, couldn't believe that Kali, the limping man, was the ogre slayer and found it amusing. He questioned how a lame man like Kali could defeat an ogre. Another man reminded him of how Kali had crushed Jiraiya. Realizing he couldn't dismiss Kali, the man asked how he could win against someone who had defeated Jiraiya. In anger, he pointed his sharp knife at the man's neck, calling him a son of a bitch, and demanded to know if the man was underestimating him, making the man fearfully apologize. He calmed down and ordered his men to gather some quick-handed guys, because if he was aiming to win, they had to make a perfect plan. Then Volton tells his men that they should just cut off the leg, which the old man also tells Kali. He was shocked upon hearing the old man's solution, but the old man just explained to him that the protruding bones kept digging into his flesh, and it was a knee, so he could just wrap it. Then the old man raised a sharp knife and told Kali that it would only hurt a little. He, panicky, asks Salavan why that old man keeps telling him to cut his leg, and he angrily tells the old man that he has to go to a pugilist match tomorrow. The old man, picking his nose, figured out that he was the one who beat and killed people, but he was trying to ignore his suggestion. Salavan asks the old man if he knows who Kali is and if he has heard of Kali the ogre slayer because he was a rising pugilist those days, but Kali just shyly tells Salavan to stop. He tells the old man that he'll get treatment somewhere else, so he should just give him the medicine to endure it for a little longer. The old man wrapped his leg while telling him that it would be easier to just cut it off and gave him the medicine, but reminded him that it's quite strong, so he should just take it once a day. Then Salavan said her goodbyes to the old man to leave, but the old man called her and told her that he didn't say to just cut Kali's leg off for no reason. Then the old man explained to her that he knew well about many surgical procedures for several people, like the one who got stabbed and the ones who got attacked with an arrow. Then the old man asks her who she thinks can treat that Kali's leg, but she just asks the old man back if he knows about the Empire's god. The old man replied that if she said the god, he often heard about it and that person's name was Jonom. But then the old man asked her what was it making her ask him back if he had dementia. The next day, at the finale of the pugilist tournament, he was waiting, feeling his legs much better. The first guard told the second guard that it was easy to guard since there was only one person in the room. The second guard responded that they didn't need to worry about the pugilists fighting each other. Then, the guards walked away, deciding to eat. Suddenly, he heard a bark behind him, and when he looked back, he saw Rovo with Salavan. He patted Rovo and told him that it had been a long time since they last saw each other. Salavan commented that she still couldn't believe Rovo was a real wolf and asked him how Rovo became so sweet around him. Suddenly, people walked toward the room. He was shocked when men shouted that he was the real ogre slayer. And the man friend tells his friend that he told him he would be there. One of the men told him that he was his fan and that his last match was great. Then, another man asked if they could shake hands, insisting it was just a handshake. Rovo looked at the men and growled furiously at them. Salavan, noticing Rovo's reaction, understood the danger and immediately pushed Callie away in time, but got slashed in the hand instead. She kicked the man in the side, making him slam onto the floor, and the man on the floor ordered the other men to attack. The man lunged at him with a dagger, and he realized there was no time to think as he needed to avoid the dagger. Suddenly, Rovo jumped at the man and the man turned to Rovo in surprise, who slashed Rovo multiple times in panic. However, Rovo managed to stand still and growled at the men, which made them quickly run away in fear. He worriedly asked Salavan if she was okay, and she replied that she was fine because it only hurt her finger. Then, she speculated that it must have been Volton's doing and that Volton must have planned it. She also admitted that it was her fault and that she really didn't expect it to happen. Then, they heard Rovo fall to the floor, making them panic and call Rovo's name. She reassured him that it was okay and that Rovo was just slightly wounded. She then told him to focus on his match because she had bet all her money on him, including the others' money and the savings she had set aside for her retirement. He adjusted the bandages on his hand and told Salavan that he understood and would be back soon. Moments later, in the ring, people cheered as the match is about to begin. Volton was surprised to see him unwounded and wondered why he wasn't injured. He noticed Volton's expression, which led him to conclude that the attack had indeed been Volton's doing. The referee started their match, and they both took their positions. Volton stared at him, noticing that he was shorter than he had thought and that his leg was not in good condition, making Volton ponder whether to attack him there. Then, Volton launched a punch, thinking his defense was weak, and hit him. Excited that his attack was working, Volton thought he could clearly attack him more. Volton launched another punch at his side, but he simply blocked it with his arm and furiously called out Volton's name, making Volton shake in fear. Nevertheless, Volton launched his fist to attack again, but he blocked it again with his arm. Volton tried once more, but he blocked it again, causing Volton to lose his patience and shout as he launched his fist at him. He countered Volton's attack by punching Volton's fist, leaving Volton surprised and asking what it was. However, he swiftly thrust his fist into Volton's mouth and grabbed Volton's tongue. He asked Volton what was wrong and why he didn't spit it out, then pushed his fist deeper into Volton's mouth and pulled his hand out, breaking Volton's teeth in the process. Volton cried out and shouted in pain. As Volton shook in pain, covering his mouth, he furiously told him not to think about eating meat in the future. Then, he punched Volton in the face, breaking other pieces of Volton's teeth. Volton tried to say that he surrendered, but he couldn't pronounce it properly. Then, he punched Volton's arm, causing Volton to shout in pain as a few of his fingers broke. But he didn't stop, he punched Volton in the face again. He launched his fist once more, striking Volton in the stomach in anger, which made everyone watching stand up in surprise. Volton then slammed to the ground and collapsed. The referee, fearfully, announced that the winner was Callie, prompting cheers from the audience. However, Callie then felt his leg hurting and cursed in frustration. The next day, at the tournament closing ceremony, the man congratulated him on his victory and told him that he should come to Corin again whenever he had time, promising good treatment, to which he agreed. On the other hand, the man handed Azalea the prize money while remarking on Callie's strength. She accepted the prize money, looking at it sadly. Later, back at their accommodation, the knights praised him, saying he did great, it was really amazing, and they had become rich thanks to him, adding that he deserved the treatment. Then, one of the knights, tearfully and proudly, told him that when he was knocked down by Jireka, he wondered if he should return to the Aegis territory and do hard labor with an axe, making him laugh awkwardly. Suddenly, the door opened, and Leonardo told Azalea that it had been a long time since they last saw each other. The knights, Callie, and Salavan glared at Leonardo in anger, but Azalea simply agreed with Leonardo that it had been a long time and that she had been waiting for this moment. When Leonardo and Azalea were seated, Leonardo expressed his surprise at Callie winning the tournament and getting the money, remarking that he didn't believe the lame boy Callie was a pugilist and also the ogre slayer, which was amazing. Azalea handed over the 10,000 guilds she had promised to Leonardo and told him that their business with him was done. Leonardo then asked her why she was trying to cut ties so easily and stated that he didn't think receiving just 10,000 guilds from her was enough, making everyone on Azalea's team clench their teeth in anger. Leonardo also mentioned that he had bet on Jurica and was unhappy that Callie won like that. He then asked Callie why he hadn't revealed earlier that he was the ogre slayer, which made Callie glare at Leonardo in anger, thinking it was nonsensical. However, Azalea just stared blankly at Leonardo and snapped her fingers. Sullivan grabbed a bag of guilds and placed it on the table. Azalea informed Leonardo that it was 20,000 guilds, leaving Leonardo surprised and sweating as he looked at the money in front of him. A few days earlier, Sullivan had asked Azalea if she really wanted to risk all the merchants' money. Azalea told Sullivan that she was participating as well and questioned why she couldn't if others could, to which Sullivan replied that she understood. Sullivan then inquired if Azalea hadn't opposed the idea earlier, and if she wasn't afraid that Callie would lose because of his leg. Azalea dismissed these concerns, asserting that she knew Callie wouldn't lose. Sullivan, stunned by this confidence, asked why Azalea had opposed the idea if she believed in Callie. Azalea responded that she believed Callie would win, even if it meant breaking the rest of his leg. Sullivan was shocked to realize that Azalea had followed them into gambling and had even gambled her own money, which made her seem quite formidable. Then, Azalea turned to Leonardo, asking what was wrong and if the amount was still not enough. Joseph, sweating profusely, replied that it was a substantial amount. Then, Joseph grabbed 3 guilds and told her he would just take that much, prompting her to ask why he was taking only 3 guilds. Joseph laughed and ordered one of his knights to let him in. The door opened, and someone informed Callie that they were meeting again. Callie was surprised to see that it was Spyrn. Spyrn asked him if he had been taking care of himself. Then, Spyrn told Joseph that he would let it slide this time and asked Joseph how the chief guard of Corin could do that. Spyrn then seriously told Joseph that the day the news reached his uncle's ears, he knew what would happen, making Joseph exhale in silence. Sullivan told Spyrn that, as she expected, he was a noble, which led Spyrn to ask if he was too neat to become a pugilist. Spyrn then expressed his curiosity about why someone who had injured his leg while fighting an ogre slayer came to fight there. He also mentioned that he uses an alias like Callie. Spyrn introduced himself with his real name, Lorvin Corina, and revealed that his uncle is the current dean of Corin. Azalea's knights couldn't believe that Spyrn said he was Corina, one of the 3 families that founded Corin. Then, Joseph awkwardly told Spyrn that he would be leaving now and waved goodbye to Callie, telling him that next time he would bet on him. A moment later, after Azalea explained everything and why they were there, Spyrn found it ridiculous and told her that he would ask a higher positioned member of his family to help Aegis. However, the Joseph family might sell their goods to them as overpriced or underpriced, but it was not his area to interfere. Azalea told Spyrn that his willingness to help was enough for her, and she thanked him. On the other hand, Callie was outside the room, thinking that if they could get help from Corin's higher-ups, Count Joseph couldn't do anything to them. Suddenly, Spyrn came out of the room, calling him, surprising Callie. Callie awkwardly and respectfully asked Spyrn why he was calling him, but Spyrn just told him that he could speak comfortably with him. Spyrn then told him that he had seen all his matches and realized that a true pugilist is indeed different. Callie, laughingly, told Spyrn that he wouldn't hit him anymore. However, Spyrn then told him that he was actually going to buy him from Azalea, but she refused, making Callie ask Spyrn in horror if that was his taste. Spyrn explained that he would buy him and then free him right away because he thought it was such a waste that he was not a free person. Callie told Spyrn that he didn't think his status was really bad and he knew it was dangerous, like walking on a blade every time, but it was an important life for him. Spyrn asked him if he thought fighting was more important to him than freedom, and he replied that it was better to die rather than not be able to fight. The number of people guarding the Aegis merchants was more than twice the size of the first time, thanks to the care of Corin. They gained significant profits since entering the imperial territory, and soon they arrived in Macedon, the capital of the empire. However, Azalea was saddened by this. Hours later, they arrived in Macedon, the capital of the empire. Sullivan looked around and noted that the roads were all paved, then observed that Macedon resembled ancient Rome. Suddenly, he heard someone shouting orders to clear the way because the empire's troops were coming. They then heard the sound of troops marching in unison and saw a line of troops entering. Salavan remarked that the imperial troops were still impressive, prompting him to ask her if she had seen the empire's troops before. She replied that she had encountered a bandit before she was hired by Azalea, and at that time, the prince and the imperial army had just returned from a subjugation. She also mentioned that she believed that the gods had connected her with the crown prince at that time, which is why she survived, making him think about the crown prince. After the guard cleared the road, he told them they could proceed. Azalea handed a letter to one of the guards and instructed him to deliver it to the third prince, Iskandar. Then, she told Callie to come to her room when they arrived at their accommodations. After they successfully entered and settled in, he went to Azalea's room and saw her speaking with the knights. However, when she noticed him, she placed the paper on the table and asked her knights to step out for a moment. When only the two of them remained in the room, he suggested that she should get some rest. She replied that she would take a good rest afterward, so it was fine, and informed him that the third prince, Iskandar, was arriving soon. Callie asked her what she meant when she said she was acquainted with Iskandar, but she only asked him back if he wanted to fix his leg, and he confirmed that it was the reason why he had come all the way there. She told him that if that was the case, from now on, whatever Iskandar does, whatever he says, and whatever he does to her, he should just stay still. He realized he was so distracted by the treatment that he had forgotten the price. He stood up and, in a loud voice, asked Azalea what she meant by it. Thinking it impossible to receive treatment for free, especially for a mere slave fighter like himself, he called out to her insistently. Suddenly, someone knocked on the door. As she stood up, telling him she guessed Prince Iskandar was already there, he grabbed her shoulder, telling her to wait. However, she seriously asked him why he was acting rudely. In turn, he questioned the point of coming all the way there if he was being disrespectful to her. She slapped his hand away, responding that all he needed to do was lie and fight, so he should just do as he pleases, leaving him stunned in shock. Then, Azalea gracefully greeted Prince Iskandar. Iskandar told her he had rushed over after hearing she was there, for even though their last meeting had been long ago, he had never forgotten her. He knew Iskandar was the third prince, but he couldn't help noticing that Iskandar seemed more like a pugilist than an aristocrat. Iskandar, noticing his discomfort, asked if he wanted to go to the toilet, given his troubled expression, which made him think Iskandar was a fool. Azalea introduced him to Iskandar as the slave fighter she had mentioned, whose name was Callie. Iskandar, with a laugh, mentioned that he was the Ogre Slayer, a famous pugilist in their kingdom. Then, Iskandar ordered his men to bring the guest to the palace while he took care of the welcoming process, to which they agreed. Callie was stunned upon hearing Iskandar mention that he couldn't let his future woman stay in such a place. As he entered the carriage and headed to the kingdom, he pondered what Iskandar meant by his future woman. Later, after Azalea explained everything, Salavan asked her if this was the agreement she had with the prince. She replied that the prince had confessed his love for her at first sight. Salavan inquired whether the beloved lady from the barony would become the prince's lover and if she had discussed it openly. She answered no, explaining that had she talked about it beforehand, they would have insisted there must be another way. She intended to inform them once everything was settled, while he remained silent, realizing it was because of him and his leg that Azalea was enduring this, making Salavan glance at him. Meanwhile, in the kingdom, a man asks Iskandar if he intends to make the lady from the barony his lover. Iskandar replies that he will discuss any political matters arising from this decision with his brothers later. Iskandar also mentions that it was love at first sight with Azalea, praising her beauty and her success as a merchant. However, he expresses his dislike for Callie, whom he had just met, noting something peculiar about Callie's eyes. Iskandar then reaffirms his commitment to a promise, asking the man where the god doctor currently is. The man replies that the god doctor went to the western workshop with the first prince. Later, as the food was ready and the nobles gathered in the hall, he entered. Salavan commented that, having washed up and changed his clothes, he looked different. Then, teasingly, Salavan told him that his treatment as a slave fighter had ended because he was now a warrior. However, he silently looked up to see Iskandar with Azalea, clenching his hand in anger, realizing that Iskandar was not the right match for her. As he was about to walk away, Salavan stopped him, inquiring about his departure. Salavan then advised him to relax, stating it was the lady's choice and that he was the one who had missed the opportunity, and the signals Azalea had given. He retorted, glaringly, that Salavan spoke as if she had experienced it herself, to which she replied that she had been observing from the sidelines for almost 2 months, so of course she knew. He sighed and told her that the situation was different now, with the trade flourishing and the Aegis estate revived. Iskandar, having drunk a lot of wine, slightly inebriated, asked Azalea if she had said Callie was a great pugilist. She confirmed, but mentioned Callie's leg was now injured. Suddenly, Iskandar derogatorily called Callie a slave fighter and challenged him to enhance the banquet's atmosphere. Callie inquired what Iskandar meant. A knight moved to reprimand him for his rudeness, but Iskandar interjected, suggesting Callie might not be a pugilist but was quite good at fighting with his bare hands, so he should demonstrate his skill casually. Azalea protested to Iskandar that Callie was injured and not in condition to fight. But Iskandar dismissed her concerns, stating Callie's hands were not injured and, if she was worried, suggested they need not use their legs. Azalea looked at him in horror, but Callie shook his head, indicating it didn't matter. The knight removed his helmet as Iskandar declared that even if it was just a bare-handed fight, if the knight lost to Callie, he would be fired. He then loudly encouraged Callie to showcase his skills, inciting Callie's anger. However, Callie knew he couldn't just stand by and do nothing to save Azalea. He removed his clothes, wrapping them around his hands, resolved that winning was the only option he had left. He stared at the knight in anger, and the knight noticed that he was young but quite disciplined. Then, the knight told him that if he collapsed or stepped back, he would lose, and they should start. He noticed that the knight had just strengthened his fist and was sure the knight would attack if provoked. Iskandar shouted for them to just fight and dropped his glass of wine. The knight launched a punch at him, which he ducked to avoid, and then punched the knight from below, but the knight blocked it in time. The knight couldn't believe his power was so strong at such a close distance. He continuously punched the knight, but the knight struck him in the chest, causing pain that he endured and launched his fist again. When the knight hit his head, he struck the man's side. The knight clenched his teeth in pain and kneeled on the ground while holding his side. The nobles were amazed that he won and expected such from a pugilist, while he was busy thinking that all he had to do was prove his strength. The knight was confused to see Iskandar's silence because he knew that Iskandar would normally celebrate. Iskandar thought it was boring because he still didn't get the feeling that Callie was the ogre slayer. Then, Iskandar looked at Azalea next to him and saw her sigh in relief, thinking there must be something. Then, he brightly told everyone that it was all for today's entertainment and thanked them for participating. Then, Iskandar put his hand on Azalea's shoulder while telling everyone to take good care of him in the next ceremony. Iskandar noticed Azalea's silence at his side. Later, in the corridor, Iskandar walked unstably, drunk, feeling that his girl didn't like him back. He thought he needed to talk with Azalea and knocked on her door. Azalea asked who it was, and he replied that it was him. Azalea opened the door and told him he was drunk. He laughingly agreed and told her he'd like to tell her something he couldn't at the banquet. She didn't want to spend the night with the prince until Callie left the empire. Still, without a choice, she let Iskandar enter her room. She asked him about the god doctor, and he replied that the god doctor was an amazing man, not just in medicine because the god doctor was good in many ways too. Then, he told her that the god doctor was a friend of his father and also a godfather and guardian to his brother, the first Prince Philip. Iskandar also mentioned that the god doctor was old but liked to make new inventions. She smiled, agreed with him, and mentioned that the god doctor must be a great person if he could easily fix a broken leg, which shocked and annoyed Iskandar because it was about Callie again. He asked her if she was worried about her slave fighter, Callie, and she replied it wasn't like that. But then he stood up, telling her that it kept bothering him for some reason. Then, he pinned her against the wall in anger, and she was shocked to see that he broke the wall. He immediately apologized to her and explained that he couldn't control it. Then, he cleared his throat and told her she didn't need to be scared because he wouldn't let her think about Callie for the rest of her life anymore, and she'd only think about him, making her look at Iskandar in fear, seeing him as a huge monster. She closed her eyes, thinking about Callie, and softly called for help. Then, she cried out and shouted for Callie. Suddenly, someone rushed into her room, and Callie hit Iskandar on the head with a chair, then angrily told him to take his hand off. Before that, Callie was behind the wall, cursing because he saw the drunk Iskandar walking in the corridor when he was on his way to his room, and wondered why he encountered Iskandar there. Then, he was surprised when Iskandar entered Azalea's room. He felt his blood boiling in anger and remembered Azalea's smile in his head. He turned around, thinking it was none of his business, but then he heard Azalea, making him look back and question if he had heard wrong. Then, he heard Azalea shout his name, making him snap and rush into Azalea's room. He saw Iskandar pinning Azalea to the wall, so he hit Iskandar with the chair on the head. Iskandar and Azalea were shocked, then Iskandar and he fell to the floor. Iskandar was bleeding and asked him what the hell he was doing, but he just grabbed the broken wood on the floor and hit Iskandar in the face with it. Then, he furiously asked Iskandar how he dared to threaten Azalea. Iskandar angrily asked him what he meant. Then, Iskandar glanced back at Azalea, who was shaking in fear, and clenched his teeth. But Iskandar shouted that he didn't care anymore and threw the wood, making him notice Iskandar's thigh twitch. When the wood fell to the ground, Iskandar said it was so painful and was about to say something. but he just launched his fist and punched Iskandar in the face, and Iskandar retaliated with a kick in the stomach. He was slammed against the wall hard and realized that Iskandar was strong. Iskandar told him that he understood the rough backstory of his actions, but now he declared that Azalea was his and ran at him to attack. He ran to meet Iskandar, realizing he did it without thinking, and decided to quickly end the fight. So, he planned to go for Iskandar's jaw, took the momentum power from running, and punched Iskandar's jaw. Iskandar's head was thrown back, but then Iskandar grabbed his arm and told him that he should follow his rule. Then, Iskandar twisted his arm in a joint lock, making him realize the pain. Then, Iskandar twisted his arm, causing him immense pain, and he punched Iskandar's body continuously to free himself, but Iskandar didn't let him go. He knew that if it continued, his arm would break. Suddenly, he heard a loud hit. He peeked back while Iskandar also looked back, holding his head, and then they both saw Azalea panting and holding a lamp in shock. The knights ran toward them, asking about the noise. Iskandar saw his knights and walked away, saying that his mood was ruined. The knights surrounded Kali and shouted at him to just surrender. The next day, Iskandar was down on one knee, bandaged. When someone inquired about his wounds, it was the first prince, Philippos. Iskandar, sweating in fear, couldn't believe Philippos had returned at such a time and stutteringly tried to reason with his brother. Philippos ordered a knight to hand him something while telling Iskandar that he should confess himself. Then, Philippos grabbed a steel bat and warned Iskandar to tell the truth before he questioned the lady beside him, asking if Iskandar preferred to be beaten to death like when they were children. This made Iskandar gasp in fear and confess everything to his brother. After Azalea heard Iskandar's explanation, she was incredulous and concerned about the treatment for Kali's injuries. She thought that despite Iskandar being drunk the previous night, he would twist the story to his advantage, but he had recounted everything without distortion. However, it was still a grave offense for a slave like Kali to have attacked a prince. Her hands shook, knowing that the death penalty was inevitable. Philippos angrily called Iskandar an idiot, causing him to flinch in fear. Then, Philippos raised his bat, shouting that he should teach Iskandar a lesson, and hit him repeatedly. Iskandar tried to plead with his brother to wait, but Philippos shouted at him to shut up, declaring he never had a drunkard for a younger brother, leaving her in disbelief. Philippos questioned Iskandar's judgment in entering a girl's room while drunk, wondering if he thought the girl wouldn't be scared or if he assumed she would be okay with it, all while continuing to beat him. Philippos then kicked Iskandar in the leg, questioning his intelligence. Philippos announced that he, Philippos VII, would conduct a brief trial on behalf of His Majesty the Emperor, who was on an expedition to the northern region, and ordered them to bring Kali, the imprisoned pugilist, before him. Later, Kali knelt before the first prince. Philippos asked if he was Kali, the pugilist, to which he replied affirmatively. Philippos stared at him for a moment, then told Iskandar that he looked more formidable than he had anticipated. Philippos then criticized Iskandar for being pathetic, but Iskandar defended Kali, stating that he wasn't just some incompetent kid and that the beating had been one-sided. Philippos angrily told Iskandar to shut up, questioning his audacity to manipulate the god doctor's treatment at will. He also reminded Iskandar of his intrusion into a woman's room in the middle of the night with the intent to harass her, noting that Iskandar consistently embarrassed himself, causing Iskandar to sulk. Philippos removed his hand armor, addressing Azalea as Aegist, and informed her that he had come from a distant kingdom and had made a covenant with Iskandar that disregarded her wishes. He approached her, stating that in doing so, she had committed a grave crime. He then slapped her hard, causing Kali to seethe with anger. She admitted that it was all her mistake, but Philippos told her that the crime of harassing the imperial family and Iskandar was severe. However, he noted that considering she was a woman who should have been aware of men's nature, the consequences she faced were already lenient. Philippos then ordered the knights to lift Kali and questioned how he could fight Iskandar with his injured leg, calling him a brave punk. Philippos approached closer, explaining that although the situation was rushed, Iskandar had a rightful claim. He stated that even if Azalea refused Iskandar, it was their issue to resolve. Therefore, in this case, Kali was a criminal who assaulted an innocent Iskandar. If Kali intended to act like a warrior until the end, he must also take the responsibilities. Azalea, crying, called out his name, but Philippos simply placed the sword near Kali's neck, asking if he had any last words. Kali swallowed his fear but replied that he had no regrets. Philippos stared at him, then swung his sword down to the rope, freeing him. He declared that Kali should protect Azalea Aegist until the end, as it was the duty of a man, while glancing at Iskandar, who just smiled at his brother. Philippos then pierced his sword into the floor, proclaiming that, according to the strict imperial laws, the winner would stand until the end. The one who loses would be regarded as defeated. Since both Iskandar and Kali, the pugilist, desired Azalea Aegist, they should have a match. The fight was scheduled for a week from that day. Later, Salavan mentioned that she had heard Philippos was a cold-hearted person without blood or tears, but this was surprising. Callie agreed, noting the most surprising part was that Iskandar didn't flee. She admitted that she felt uneasy that night, so she had already sent some of their men to Lady Azalea's room, questioning if her actions were because of her drunken confession the previous day about knocking down the third prince and running away with Lady Azalea. Callie denied it was for that reason. Suddenly, someone inquired if he was the pugilist who had beaten up the prince. The knights praised his bravery and encouraged him to turn Iskandar into mincemeat in their next encounter, leaving Callie puzzled by the atmosphere and why they referred to Prince Iskandar so casually. The knights then sternly instructed him to follow them, and upon asking the reason, they revealed they were going to meet the god doctor. Callie was momentarily stunned in shock, then relieved that he would finally meet the god doctor who could potentially cure his leg. Well guys, that's the end of the video. If you like this video, comment part 7 in the comments section. Also subscribe to the channel, hit the bell and like the video. Thank you for watching and see you next time again.